Good evening, members. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the public and visiting members. We now approach probably one of the more evocative parts of the draft's local plan to discuss. I'm going to run through the administration parts first because we've got some new visiting people in the audience tonight. Fire evacuation procedures I'm starting with. There's nothing planned in the way of practices this evening, but in the event of a fire alarm, there are two exits from this room. One is at the back and one is to the right, my right here, and down the stairs, and everybody to rendezvous in the Memorial Park. I would ask those people with mobile telephones to either put them on silent or off, please. The meeting is being webcast, and the webcast is operational. To receive any apologies for absence? I see none. Resignations and replacements? Councillor Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm here in place of Councillor Shaw.
Thank you very much. Declarations of conflict of interest, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a disclosable pecuniary interest in anything, but I do have a personal interest in three particular sites that are on my register of interest, one being Kiln Farm, one being Lily, and one being a site in East Woodhey that I am aware of that do or do not relate to the local plan, and therefore I declare a personal interest. It's on my record, and it's important that I'm open and transparent in that way, as say this evening.
Thank you, and so noted. And, sorry, Councillor Eardley.
For the avoidance of doubt, of course, BAS 104 is in my ward, and I did campaign against the planning application there, and I have expressed views against Manydown in the past.
Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest in the site in Whitchurch at Blosswood Lane, so I'll be leaving the room when that discussion takes place.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
On the back of Councillor Lee's declaration, as somebody who spoke against Kiln Farm at the appeal, I should put that on the record as well.
Fine, thank you. All done? There are no urgent items. No minutes to confirm, as far as I'm aware. Member of public participation. I'll cover this one now. We have a list of members of the public and visiting members who wish to speak this evening. I'll go into a bit more detail about that, about how we're doing it. Essentially, we're doing this site by site, as listed in the papers for this committee dated the 26th of June. There are some members of the public who want to speak on general points. I will take those first, but we've got a little bit to get through before we get to that point, and I'll be calling them up to sit at the table at the end. Most people, I think, have been here before. There will be an allowance of 2 minutes to speak, but we'll come to that. But I should have we should have captured everybody on this particular list. Standing invitation portfolio holder to present any kind of report or statement, and I invite Councillor Riffel to come up. I've got a couple more things just to say. There's no referrals from other committees to the Council. Issues referred by the Cabinet, no. And we are into the pre-submission local plan. Councillor Riffel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say to the committee and to the members of the public listening and the visiting councillors the following, that Scenario 2 is the officer's recommendation. Scenario 2 is our starting point. Scenario 2 is our current destination. If members of this committee wish to depart from any part of Scenario 2, then I will wish to hear compelling evidence as to why that should be, and to make sure, as the majority of you recommended, that the figure equals 748. So it's a matter for you whether you seek to depart from Scenario 2 as a committee and debate it, but I will want to hear the debate and the evidence that supports any departure from Scenario 2. Otherwise, Scenario 2 will be my destination in due course. I cannot, of course, advise the visiting members of the public as what they wish to say, that's entirely a matter for them. But can I say to visiting councillors and even any former councillors, it'd be much more constructive if you do, when you say, if you wish to say that site X should come out of scenario 2, that you suggest where site Y should go into it so that the sum 748 is made at the end. That's all I wish to say.
Councillor Watts, you raised your hand for what purpose? You've withdrawn your hand. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor. Of anybody following in the papers, we're referring to the original paper, the 26th of June, and we start this evening's discussion on page 52 of 269. And it's to do with housing distribution, paragraph 4.13. And I'm going to get to the speakers when we come to the sites, to the sites, but for the members of the committee, paragraph 4.13. And I'm going to go through this page by page. Mr. Hunter?
Just as by way of a very short introduction, obviously this is the 5th of the 6 meetings that we've been having on the local plan. Our discussions tonight will inform the Cabinet and then ultimately Council on the 25th of July. Page, as Councillor Mitchell says, Councillor Miller says, page 52, paragraph 13 is our starting point for the discussion, going through to page 74 of the papers. We've also prepared for members a supplementary report which picks up on a number of issues either raised in the previous meetings or pick up on particularly the Manidown land allocation, and we've referred to para 4.4 in the 26th of June papers. And so we've picked that up in the supplementary papers for members. So when we come to talk about Manidown, we need to refer to the map and the text there. In general, the officer recommendations as of the 26th remain the same, and we've put them up on the screen just to remind everyone. As you'll be aware, some of those things have already been dealt with. We're really dealing now tonight with the final parts of the pre-submission local plan and the approach to sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to run through these pages by paragraph numbers. If you've got any observations, we'll discuss them. 4.13. 4.14 on page 53. Councillor Lee. 4.13. Page 53. 4.14. 4.15, Councillor Leake.
Relatively minor, but I think it does help. Elsewhere in the text, it says the main focus for growth is Basingstoke, including Chinham, and I think it would be helpful if that was continued throughout, because I think that's what we mean. And the other thing is about 8 or 9 lines beneath that, there's a reference to developments at Beggarwood, Park Village and Rooksdown. Well, Park Village, I think, was the sort of marketing name for Rooksdown, and it really is, if we could take that out, because I think it's just confusing. Thank you.
So noted by the officers, thank you. 4.16. 4.17. Councillor Potts.
When we reached this point once before, months ago, I said I agree with the officers, and apart from murmurings of surprise, the meeting then moved on. And when we got to a half a call-in that we had, it was said two things. One, a general thing, that the only recommendation that came out of this committee was about Swing Swang Lane. I don't know where that is, but secondly, it was said that I had never committed myself to a number for Whitchurch, which was well wrong. So if we're making recommendations, as it says up here, can we take it that if we don't make adverse comment on the report, we're endorsing the report, or do we each have to speak each time we agree with what's in front of us?
If we make no comment on the report, we accept the report.
I recommend what's in front of us. I am going to make a comment because I want to draw attention to the last sentence of paragraph 4.17. Given the historic nature of Whitchurch with a central historic core, the town does experience local congestion that the council will seek to reduce where possible. I would like to see some evidence of the council doing anything at all that meets that commitment.
Any comment, officers, on that one? Noted. Four 4.18. 4.19. Overton. 4.20. 4.21. Yes, Councillor.
Just to draw everyone's attention to the concern about sewerage infrastructure. And I would like to just give notice that I'd like to come back to that when we consider the actual policy for Overton Hill.
Absolutely. Bramley? Don't forget, we're going back to the sites policies themselves, so 4.22. And over the page to page 57, we've got 4.29 to 431. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just specifically on policy SS7 and the regenerating residential neighbourhoods, there's a few points for the officers. The final paragraph of the final sentence of the first paragraph there, regeneration proposals will be permitted which would result in a demonstrable overriding benefit to the local community. I'd like to try to understand from officers how we might qualify that, because that's a very large statement to make in the context of regeneration proposals. A recent example, particularly in our own ward, where we've seen Fremantle, Tampere and Westray come forward, actually, while the regeneration in some ways has been a positive in some aspects, it's been a negative in others, because we have lost a third of our open space in that area as a result. So the demonstrable benefit may well only be a planning officer's point of view, rather than a community point of view. So we can support regeneration, but it's the consequence of that. So I would like that just explored a little bit more so that we're clear what we mean by it going forward. That's the first point on that policy.
Just in the following paragraph, obviously I think we try and pick that very point up. So the preparation of proposals will require the full involvement and consultation with the affected local community. And I see that very much as part of that process, which I think happened at Tavern of Fremantle, so that you could feel that those who are going to be moving out of potentially poor housing are going to be in a much better circumstance than they're in at the moment, and that there are other benefits. So let's say, for instance, in that example, the quality of the open space is improved, that kind of thing. But we very much noted that point, I think, previously when it was raised, and added that specific paragraph.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're saying, Andrew, really, because I mean, from our perspective, in terms of what was done in that example, the consultation and the engagement of the community could have been an awful lot better than it was. So again, saying it in the qualitative element of actually what we see on the ground is a different bit. So I understand what you've said. I'd quite like to see that beefed up a little bit. The other bit there, and that I'd like to see inserted, relates to a joined-up approach between our housing department, the planning department, and RSLs. Because one of the major issues to do with regeneration is the disconnect between, as you say, decanting, residents moving, the quality of what they're moving to, the support that's available for them to move, and then also going back into whatever is then built. So the relationship between those three departments is absolutely critical. Now, whether it sits in the policy, and I'm saying it now purely because I want to get it on the radar, I want people to understand it, because it is still an outstanding issue of this council's approach to regeneration. So I appreciate it may not sit in the policy, it might want to be in the supporting notes as a comment of an aspiration or a protocol we want to see established of how the departments and our RSLs will work together. On that line, if you go over the page to 429, you've got the whole list of things there. ownership, tenure, indices of deprivation, crime disorder. It's all headings, but it's what sits beneath it. Before, we had a neighbourhood renewal strategy that was clearly identifying those issues down to local areas. So if we're going to see master planning, can we just make sure that the link between that very broad statement and, for example, what is in the South Ham extension gets linked? Because that's really crucial. Just because you're saying it there doesn't mean that we've actually picked up what's going on in that community in terms of regeneration. So your master planning just needs to link that. I'm sure you've already got that in mind, but it doesn't say it there, and I really appreciate that it would. In 431, you talk about the density issue, and this is my concern in general about the way it's worded. We're talking here about increasing numbers. In regeneration, you don't always want to increase the density. It's not always an objective. And I think in the context of one councillor's comments in here, which I'm very disturbed at, the deputy leader of the council's comments, where he talks about CPOing and thinking we can CPO areas as a mechanism for regeneration. I am disturbed by that perspective. I'm glad it's not been taken up, and I hope the portfolio holder isn't listening to that comment, because in regeneration, I think that would open up a can of worms. It was a comment, it's in there on the record, so I highlight it because no one's discounted it yet, and I want it discounted. In terms of going forward, mix of units isn't included in this notes either, in terms of the quality of what we put back. I'm just picking out lots of areas here of the regen proposal that might be worth highlighting to give us a better wording going forward to see what we want really delivered on the ground. It's a big area for us, as you can imagine. So thank you for letting me say those things.
Councillor Garrett. Yeah, on the same thing, density policy. I mean, it says for these three particular schemes that we're going forward with, we're going to have a net 200 additional dwellings. So does that mean an additional 200 dwellings on what we have there at the moment? Also, carrying on the theme Councillor Harvey said, I noticed the Deputy Leader of the Council is actually pushing for a higher density within these within the regeneration of these three particular areas. So he doesn't want high density in his area, the rural area, but he's quite willing to cram it into the town area. So it's just double standards again from members of this cabinet. So I'd like some sort of clarification. Are we going to get higher density within those three particular schemes that's coming forward?
This policy obviously supports a strategic approach to regeneration, so it picks up some of the points that Councillor Harvey had, because it goes into a bit more detail than the policy. In terms of net additional, yes, that's additional houses, not just replacing like with like. That's over the plan period, so you're looking at 200 net additional homes within the plan period, so over the next 15 years. And how that would be dealt with may have nothing to do with density. It may be that there are particular pieces of open space that could be used. There might be particular pieces of, there may be places where the housing is very low density. It could be, more adequately used. You might use space in a different way. So there's all sorts of opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be a higher density. It just means that you might use land in a different way.
And my apologies, we moved over SS1, policy SS1. Is there any comments there, Councillor Garrett? I'd like to put on record where I don't think we're actually debating the sites within the defined settlement boundary. I've been on this committee for 2 years now, and we haven't had a proper, thorough debate. Where we're making recommendations to actually go forward to the cabinet member that the sites sort of within the existing settlement boundary. I mean, everybody, I keep banging on about it, but everybody keeps speaking against Downgrange, and it's still in there within the settlement boundary to be built on 100 homes. Just when are somebody in this cabinet going to listen to the members of this council and members of the public? I'd like to put that on record, please. It's on the record. It's being webcast, so everything you say is on the record. Any comments, officers?
Just make the point we've probably made a number of times, that the SHLA outlines the potential supply. It doesn't allocate particular sites in the built-up area. There are sites within there that are debated every year. So this committee talks about those every year. In terms of their allocation, we only need to allocate sites which are likely to really, which couldn't come forward naturally through the planning process. So I'm not sure that we have this with this point regularly raised, but I think it's dealt with through the supply table, which was on page 52 of the papers, and you identify those sites that might come forward through the regeneration, SPBs, settlement policy boundaries, and brownfield and urban opportunities.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do debate these sites regularly, but nothing ever changes. I mean, we're identifying it in the SLAR document. We're giving a green light to the developers to come forward with these sites. Nothing ever changes. Thank you.
Nothing on SS1. Right, now we'll turn to page 59. Greenfield site allocations. And I've moved to the speakers now. Now, I've got some general comments that want to be made. Mr. Luff, Mr. David Luff, and I understand you have general comments to make about the pre-submission local plan. I haven't had any information to you about a specific site. Well, Downgrange is not on the list of sites that are up for discussion this evening. Mr. Luff, if you'd like to come forward, and you have 2 minutes to make comments. Bearing in mind, committee, that we are looking at scenario 2 as defined by the portfolio holder is where he wants to get to. And this particular site is not included on that list for the pre-submission local plan.
Just for clarification, on that list, are we referring to urban/brownfield opportunities / brackets unallocated sites? Is that what we mean by it's on that list? Right.
I'm
We've all
advised
got
by the officers,
we've all got
yes.
brownfield opportunities in our
We've all got
wards.
brownfield opportunities all around the borough, I think. Mr. Luff, you have 2 minutes.
I represent Downgrange Action Group, whose stated aim is to stop housings being built on a section of Downgrange that's identified as BAS 069 on the SLAR list. We're opposed to residential development of Downgrange for 2 reasons. First, the loss of green open space, and the second is the increased traffic in the area. BAS 069 is a green open space that has been used by many of the local people over several decades. It continues to be used for recreational purposes on a daily basis, and it has also become an overflow car park where major events take place at Downgrange. With the continued expansion of housing around Basingstoke area, the need for green open spaces becomes more important. The use of facilities at Downgrange is increasing as the facilities of Downgrange are improved. So it would be astounded if the green open spaces available is reduced. If the housing goes ahead on the section of Downgrange, we will lose the green open space forever. It's a value that cannot be measured in pure monetary terms.
You have half a minute left.
Okay. And we'll never be able to retrieve it. We're also worried about the effect of increased traffic on the local roads and the extra housing it will bring. Local people already feel the effect of consistently increased traffics in the area, and the housing developments along, and retail businesses along Brighton Hill roundabout, Pack Lane and the A33. Downgrange is a fantastic resource that Basingstoke deserves. it should be developed as a space for recreation and not
If you could wind up.
privatised for housing.
Okay, thank you very much. Is Councillor David Thornton here? Councillor Gary Watts?
Can I just
Yes.
declare an interest? I'm a member of Downgrange Action Group. Can I get that on, please?
You raised the question of downgrading tonight. You didn't declare an interest at the beginning of this committee meeting.
Well, I'm declaring it now then. It's on my records, so there you go.
Okay, I understand that you can declare it during the meeting. Councillor David Thornton here. Councillor Thornton, do you want to speak on general topics or specific sites? If you would come down to the table, please. If it's briefly on general points, and then could you include your site observations in that 2 minutes? I'll see how we go on timing, but your general points now. You have 2 minutes, Councillor Thornton.
I chair the planning committee of Chinham Parish Council. The point I want to make about on a general basis is that we are being asked to make judgments about these sites, and there's so often in the report we get phrases like measures to mitigate the impact and measures to improve accessibility, or words like alleviate, but nowhere is there any specific or any definite points about what is. I mean, something like measures to alleviate traffic congestion, I would submit, can be anything from, shall we say, a one pedestrian refuge to a full-scale graded junction. And I think if we are going to be asked to make judgments between these various sites, we should be given definite, concrete proposals about what is going to be done to alleviate these problems of congestion and infrastructure problems. So that's all on that one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Could you step down, please? And thank you for your brevity. Mr. Peter Blois, please. Yes, he has on a specific site. I'm working this through site by site, and members of the public and visiting members can speak on the specific sites. We take it through. Mr. Blois, you have 2 minutes on general topics.
Thank you, Chairman. Peter Blois on behalf of Country Watch and Solve. We believe there is now an opportunity to add to the housing location options from amongst sites identified in Tadley. A short paper was given to people, to this committee in advance of this. Members must be aware that the Office of Nuclear Regulations has changed its policy in the light of Secretary of State's ruling over Boundary Hall site in Tadley. This was confirmed in an exchange of correspondence instigated by Country Watch and Solve between Maria Miller and the ONR. There are copies of this with the portfolio holder and officers as well. The ONR has now agreed that each application around AWE be treated on its merits. The draft local plan before you tonight does not reflect this updated ONR policy decision. Tadley is the second largest settlement in the borough. It can now take its fair share. In the SLA version 7, there are a number of sites around Tadley with a potential for 2,500 homes, 1,790 in our borough. At the Cabinet meeting on the 28th of February, Councillor Donald said, give Tadley what it wants, some housing. In the light of this and Councillor Donald's statement that Tadley wants more homes, I have 3 questions. Why has the local plan not been changed to reflect the potential availability of Tadley? Why have the planners not pushed harder to include TAD 032 and 038, which could take 1,200 homes? Why does the draft pre-submission local plan before you tonight not reflect the ONR policy change? Tadley sites will be considered on a site-by-site basis. If a Tadley windfall were added to the local plan, there is no good reason for the ONR to object. It is not site-specific. The ONR has the opportunity to comment on relevant planning applications under policy SS8.
Would you like to wind up, please?
Another final point, just to add for correction here. Apologise if this has been covered in previous meetings. Why is Table 2 on page 26 of 111 in the draft pre-submission local plan 14 months out of date, April 2012?
I must ask you to finish, Mr. Boyce.
Valid. I have a number of questions that would be much appreciated if you could answer them tonight. Thank you.
I'm not sure that we could answer them off the cuff, but I will give officers the opportunity.
Just in terms of Tadley, policy SS8, which is on page 76, reflects the ONR's position in the fact that they will, we can put to them, well, a planning application may come for them. We have to have commitment from the off-site emergency plan that could be accommodated in the Tadley area. At this particular time, they've asked that there be no allocations within the plan, and that we have no certainty that they would even give single houses at this point permission. They may do, they may not. So there's no certainty that we could allocate either a windfall figure nor an allocation to the site, hence the approach that's been taken in the pre-submission document.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. As a member of the local liaison committee at AWE, I have spoken to the Office of Nuclear Regulation, and yes, they will look at applications site by site. They have passed some small development without any objection. I can think of a site of 4 in Sandy Lane which has gone through. However, in terms of the volume of housing which is likely to be released, we are probably talking in terms of hundreds rather than thousands over the 15-year period. I can't see any major sites being released.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to explore that a little bit more so I've got it clear in my head. If it's site by site and it's on its merits, then so be it for all the rest of the sites that are in the local plan, because they're all site by site and they're all on their own merits when they come forward to a planning committee. It's the context of the ONR and its relationship here that's the factor. Let me get to the point I was making before you jump all over me. So from my perspective, what I'd like to understand is, if we're talking about no allocation in Tadley, that's one thing. If we were talking about, as has been suggested, an allocation via a neighbourhood plan that may well result in an allocation over the next God knows how many years, as a result of merit, applications being judged on merits, 4 here, 5 there, or God knows what, is that something that should be considered? And can that be sustainably ruled out in the face of an inspector looking at the plan? Because if we're going to say no, not ever because of this, will that stand up to scrutiny if challenged? It may well be that 4 or 5 here, leading to 100 over a period of God knows how many years to 2029, might be acceptable. And if that is where the inspector draws the line, I'd rather know about it now in terms of what we may need to, a contingency on that, than be forced into a position later on. So I just want to understand, because it seems to me the ONR are saying 2 little things here. They're leaving the door open for themselves, and is that for good reason?
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Just to come back, I've absolutely no intention of jumping over Councillor Harvey. But if I can assist.
He's not that tall.
Thank you. The ONR is involved because they are responsible for the emergency zone and the emergency policy, the evacuation policy in that area. And there's certainly unlikely to be any change in the next 15 years in the perceived threat. And I can't see that they are going to be happy about development of 100 homes. They were very unhappy when Tivoli Park went through the Secretary of State. And that's when they really clamped down and said absolutely nothing. And that's a situation they've now backed away from. So infill, maybe. Small developments, maybe. Large developments, no chance.
Mr. Hunter.
just simply, the other point just to make is in terms of the supply side, we already have a small windfall allowance within the plan period of up to 700 homes. That would pick up any of those 2, 3, 4 houses in the Tadley area.
Right, I don't believe I have any more speakers on general points for the local plan. The rest of them, on my list anyway, are site-specific. So we're going to move on to, as I say, page 59. And we're looking, first of all, at Manydown. Now, there is a revised site policy on Manydown in the I'm sorry. On the list? Which one? Yes. Oh, the text at the top. Ah, because we were starting on the Manydown. Yes, Councillor.
I did make this comment previously, but I haven't seen a revised version. But I believe it would be enormously helpful to everybody if the proposed sites were recorded in chronological order of starting, rather than in size, number of houses from the 3,000 at the top to 100 at the bottom, because then one would get some feel for when things were really happening. And secondly, we'd also know then that the gypsy and traveller sites were on those which weren't going to be started for at least 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Behrman, did you have some general? Okay, if you'd like to come down. Councillor Skivett.
Are we discussing policy XX Greenfield site allocations table?
That's what we're on. And the first one.
I thought you said you were going to talk about Manydown, not the table.
But because that's the first location on this particular list. I appreciate what Councillor Leake said, but you are referring to the text at the top.
The content of the table, yeah.
So I'm sorry. Say again.
The content of the table.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Gilbert, do you wish to comment on the content of the table?
Yes, I don't accept it.
Excuse me?
I don't accept it.
Then what would you have in its place? If you'd like to make a constructive...
I'll discuss that at a later stage, but I don't believe that the sequential test for flood risk has been used correctly as per the MPPF and as per the flood risk requirements, and that therefore sites on this table which have been fed into from category 1 breach the MPPF requirement for the sequential test application, and that therefore there are 2 sites in here which breach the MPPF because they should not be here, and they are east of Basingstoke, and in its place I would put another category 1 site, which for whatever reason I don't know, because I've mentioned this on numerous occasions in writing, BAS 133 should, if you apply the sequential test, be on this list and not BAS 121.
Then I think as we come to the various sites that we have on this list, you may be able to make those points on individual sites. You heard what the portfolio holder said this evening, so that's the line we're taking on this whole.
Yeah, and I'm honouring that line. I've said BAS 121 should not be on the list. I will talk about it when we get to that policy, but I'm talking about the table in particular, and as a replacement site I would propose that 133 should be on the list, because it is, if you apply the sequential test, nowhere near the highest flood risk ranking which BAS 121 is, which breaches NPPF and government guidelines.
When we get to number 3 on that particular list, east of Basingstoke, you'll be able to speak on those particular points. Councillor Behrman, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. In a way, what Councillor Cubit's just said helps to illustrate what I'm trying to put forward tonight. May not be popular with many. I do fully understand and accept why there is now this great rush to move forward, i.e. The possibility of planning by appeal. I fear, however, in this urgency to get things decided and perhaps rush over the sort of things that Councillor Cubitt has mentioned, because I just don't see within the timetable the opportunity to address such thoughts, we're going to finish up making mistakes. You yourself, and I think rightly, said you wanted to delay this part of the discussion until we'd got more information on infrastructure, transport, water, all the other things that we still haven't got the information on. If you have, I believe something's been handed out about Manydown. I wanted to promote Manydown tonight, but I don't know what's been handed round to colleagues, and there isn't time enough to see it and to digest it. And we're now looking at next week the Cabinet report, which seems to be a mirror of what's already in here, so it's obviously not allowing much time for serious changes. To my mind, we should be, and this is where I'll specifically talk about the list, taking out everything under Manydown, through to and including Kennel Farm. They should all come out, and yes, the answer to that is to put them into Manydown. That's perfectly possible. There's enough space there. It'll take a bit of time. One could do a leading edge and innovative development there that even if the time scale is a bit tight to get them done, well, it would be to get it done in the time, it is doable. Particularly, I think the local plan inspector would be impressed if we were doing a leading edge type development and say, right, this is something really worth waiting for, and one could make quite a good case for that, bearing in mind the fact that our plan has been so delayed because of the judicial review, which I'm sure he or she would be able to take on board. So as I say, I appeal to take those particular ones I've mentioned out of the list, replace it with Manydown, and do a really truly comprehensive development at Manydown. Thank you very much, Chair. I see my numbers, my time's run out. In closing, I'll just say, can we call it east of Chinham, not east of Basingstoke? I'll say it each meeting I come to, and one day somebody might listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Behrman. Councillor Garrett.
Talking on the Greenfield site allocations, agreeing with Councillor Behrman about Manydown. The site owners of Manydown said they could take more than 3,080. The figures I saw was near enough 4,000. And I think we should be taking a strategic view as of authority, looking for long-term planning instead of having all this piecemeal development with all the infrastructure deficits we're going to have, especially on the east of Basingstoke. I think it's the way we should be going as a borough, taking this piece of land and developing it properly. Thank you.
Any comments, officers?
Made the point before, in terms of Manydown, we do see this as a long-term plan. This goes up to 2029, and we anticipate that Manydown will deliver long beyond that. The allocations for 3,080 is at the very high end of delivery. We've looked across the piece to see what delivery rates are on other sites. They tend to be lower than the 300, so we're going at some to get to this level of development in the plan period. It certainly, in our minds, isn't an option to just lump all of the development in Manydown and hope for the best. We've got to have deliverable sites. We've got to have sites that an inspector is going to believe and see can deliver across the plan period. And that's the reason why it's allocated for the amount it is.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
I don't always agree with Andrew Hunter, but on this occasion I do.
I've got County Councillor Stephen Reid. Good evening, Councillor. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you. In draft policy SS 3.1, the officers are proposing at clauses M and N that the Council shall include measures to mitigate the impact of development on the local road network and include the provision of a new link road between the A339 and the B3400. With respect, I don't think the thinking on this has gone far enough, not nearly far enough. A new link road between the Worting Road and the Kingsclere Road was proposed in 2005, and the inspector criticised it very heavily as an inadequate addressing of the traffic problems to the west of Basingstoke. This policy, as it stands on the papers in front of you, represents, in my opinion, little more than a dusting off of the proposals that were rejected in 2005. The overall traffic volumes would require a dual two-lane road before the completion of the major development area. I cannot be confident that the northern part of the link road could be satisfactorily routed around or between the two scheduled ancient monuments so as to avoid damaging the underlying archaeological remains, and I have serious doubts as to the likelihood over the life of the MDA of the strategy, the transportation strategy, working effectively. Now, it's not sufficient, in my opinion, to ensure the ability of a link road to the south. We ensured the ability to build Chinham Railway Station, and it never happened. The fact that the railway station never happened is annoying enough. If the Western Bypass never happens, it will be a disaster. If you're going to have a major development area to the west of Basingstoke, you need to secure the route of the Western Bypass from the M3 up to the Kingsclere Road. You need to know that the landowners will agree to the use of the land, that Network Rail will approve the crossing, and you need to know that you can find the money to do it. If you just do it on the basis of, we think we'll put a road in somewhere around there and we'll work it out as we go along, with respect, councillors, that is not sufficiently good planning for a major development area.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Raffel.
Looking at County Councillor Reid is listening. Can Mr. Hunter just tell the committee what the inspector who dealt with the last local plan said about building, just penciling in or firming up a road to the south between the B339, whatever it is, down to the M3?
Officers met with the inspector last week just to go through the plan and see whether there are any particular issues with it. We talked at length about Down and what would be delivered in the plan period and what would be required in the plan period based on the evidence we've got to date on our transport assessment, etc. His view was very much that we needed to deal with what the impacts of the impacts of the scheme in the plan period, so dealing with the impacts that may be created up until 2029, but not to inhibit the ability to take forward further roads, infrastructure, etc., that may be required beyond the plan period. In doing so, we've changed the policy somewhat just to make sure that we're clear that there are those opportunities for links to a further road in the future, and that we're not inhibiting the ability for the master planning which is being undertaken by the landowner to come to full fruition.
Start to tell the committee about what he said about putting in detail or anything about the road going south from the Worting Road down to the M3.
I feel like I'm being cross-examined. The point was that I think he was saying to us that if you've got the necessary words in the policy that enable that linkage and enable the future planning to happen, that would be acceptable from a planning perspective. He would be interested, obviously, to see the wider master planning and understand how the development might take place over the period beyond the local plan. But it's not necessarily necessary at this stage to have a full working road within that plan period. It's the elements that need to serve the development.
So if it's put in, then as a consequence it will be the inspector will have to take a view upon where it is and how it functions, if the southern part.
Yes, I think if in terms of you were trying to, for instance, safeguard a piece of land that was running through an area where you might have to do things like, take bits of people's land, etc. There would be lots of questions to ask about that. Because it's essentially open countryside at this point in time, there aren't those inhibitors to enable it to happen in the future. So he was quite clear that, you know, if you're putting that line in, if you put an indicative line in, there may be all sorts of questions about routing, which you don't necessarily need to deal with in the local plan period. So it's essentially you need to be able to demonstrate that it could happen, but you don't need to show where particularly.
Councillor Mr. Cubitt.
It's just that given that Councillor Reid is the county councillor and a cabinet member of Hampshire County Council, and Hampshire County Council is responsible for our highways, do we not have a little bit of a problem already with him stating that he can't see it as being achievable when he's a cabinet member of the very authority that will be presiding over what gets built that side of town?
I think Councillor Reid would like to respond to that.
Senior member of the Hampshire County Council.
With respect, I'm just clarifying here. The things that I was reading out about that were the inspector's comments from 2005. They are the words that I picked up from the inspector's report in 2005, and therefore I'm presenting them to this committee as material evidence that you may wish to consider. And I'm not saying that things are impossible in developing in that area. I'm merely saying that if you want to have a major development area, in my opinion, the infrastructure needs to be planned.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell. I don't want to turn this into a debate. At this
No,
particular stage.
just another question arising. I didn't quite pick up the exact words that Andrew used, but the inspector said it would be nice to see something or other on the longer term future. Can I understand whether the local planning authority will continue past this process in background to securing agreement on the local plan, will continue actively to discuss with the landowner how and where future road access will be provided and what plans there are for that and what they expect to happen in terms of finance, so that that doesn't become, rather as it did last time, put on the back shelf and rather forgotten.
Just in terms of, obviously we're at this particular point in time we're looking to deal with the allocation. Beyond that, there's master planning to be done, which would be done jointly with the landowner. That would look firstly for us in terms of this part of the plan period, but obviously the landowner is looking beyond that plan period, and you will want to make sure that the master planning that is done would enable the wider benefits of Manny Down in the longer term future to be enabled. So if there was a particular point where linking a road was more difficult, for instance, you wouldn't necessarily want to in your top part of Manny Down put the link there and then find you couldn't connect later, so you would use the master planning. You would also use that master planning at a later point with the inspector just to demonstrate the kind of deliverability aspects of the site and what the longer term view might be.
Thank you, Councillor. No, we don't question public speakers normally. Thank you, Mrs. Curate.
It's in the constitution. We're permitted to ask members when they come and talk for 2 minutes. We're permitted to ask.
He's not a member of this borough council.
Visiting visitors are permitted to be asked questions. It's in the constitution.
Councillor Reid, could I ask you to come back? And it's up to you how you respond to Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, since we're very fortunate to have such a senior member of Hampshire County Council present tonight, I was wondering whether he could advise us when he's going to pay the 5 million that we paid for the 10 million, for which Hampshire County Councils... No, I'm being very serious.
This has got nothing to do with the subject of the agenda tonight.
It absolutely does. It's Manny Down.
Thank you, Mr. Cubitt. It's not the subject of this discussion. That is subject for, I would suggest, EPP and not the P&I committee. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on a point on the link road as well. we were stating that the provision of the link road would be there for beyond the plan period, but on the greenfield site allocations, which precedes Steel Policy XX many down, it states that necessary infrastructure is provided at a rate and scale to meet the needs that arise from that development. And I just needed a bit of clarity around that as to how that would meet it if it was potentially at risk of not happening if it wasn't factored into the master plan.
This is dealing within the plan period, so you would need the necessary infrastructure supporting the development that happens within this plan period to happen. So that's essentially what this policy would deal with. So let's say you needed a secondary school or you needed a junior school within the plan period, you would aim to ensure that that had happened through the process. I think in terms of a linking road, at this point in time, the transport work that we've done to date doesn't suggest that that's required for the development of 3,080 units, but it may be for a further development in the future, and you would deal with that through the master planning and then the next local plan if such land was to be allocated through that.
So is that a result from the transport assessment? This has changed from a bypass to a link road. Is there a difference between the two?
Are you referring to policy? Sorry.
In the revised one on policy N, it refers to it as include the provision of a new link road between the A339 and the B400. And was there not the bypass originally? But are you saying that the transport assessment changed that?
I think we've always said link road, unless it's... Yeah, we've always said link road in the policy. The transport assessment looked at the link road in all scenarios, and then the wider Manidown route in another scenario, but it didn't make any assumptions as to whether it would be a bypass or a link. It was simply there was a route there, and would that attract traffic?
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will know, I have always opposed the development of Manidown. I have been chairman of Wootton St Lawrence Parish Council for many, many years. I've been a parish councillor for 25 years, so I haven't been keen to see a big change there. But I think we all have to recognise that we have to provide housing somewhere. We have here a plan which I think the Cabinet are keen to adopt, and we can all say not in our patch, and if we do, we'll get nowhere. So I have reconciled myself that Manidown will be developed. I would love it all to be in Old Basing, but it's not going to be. So I think we've all got to be realistic and accept that this is what we've got and make the best of it. And I am prepared to do that myself, and I don't want the whole evening to be batting sites from one side to the other. But I would like to ask that a small change is made to this policy. In policy little j, I would like, if members could agree, to retain the separate identity and essential character of Worting and Wootton St Lawrence villages and restrict coalescence between the villages and the new development. Now, I know there is some protection for Wootton St Lawrence within the agreement with the owners, but I would like to see that incorporated in here, because this is the public document that members of the public can see, the residents of Wootton St Lawrence can see, and note that we are protecting their interests, just as we have all agreed that there shouldn't be coalescence between various other villages and the town, or between other villages. And I hope members will support me on that. The only other thing I would like to say, Chairman, is on this link road, I made a plea in 2005 that the link road should not be through the development. I know this is all part of the master planning and this will come up later, but I would like to put it on record that I would be opposed to a link road which carves through the development, because I do not think that helps that particular community. I really feel that a link road has to go around it so that the community remains a community and you can work, play or whatever within your community without having a major road, which is going to carry a very large amount of traffic, whatever we think. Thank you very much.
It's all right. It's all right. It's a very large subject, and it's inevitable that we move from one foot to the other, if you like. But we do have one suggestion into the policy coming from Councillor Leake to the insertion of Wootton St Lawrence. Would the committee agree to that insertion in the policy, Councillor Harvey?
Just a quick point, I think it's important to reference the existing covenants in the policy because they exist, they are the protection for Wootton St Lawrence. That's really, if you're going to say Wootton St Lawrence, this whole needs to be put in, you don't do it in bits and bobs. If the policy says Wootton St Lawrence, the covenant should be referenced.
The problem is that not many people come in to look at the agreement, and I'm not sure they're fully entitled to necessarily look at the agreement, and I would just feel more comfortable if there was something in here which said, yes, we are protecting the village of Wootton St Lawrence. If there is additional security through the covenant, wonderful, but I'm not sure that members of the public would necessarily understand that.
I was simply thinking of referencing it in the policy itself, giving us that extra protection that I say what Councillor Leake has said.
Councillor Cubitt.
Just very quickly, Andrew, the covenanted land, is it outside of what is identified as the country park? Because the way to deal with Councillor Leake's request is to have drawn on the map the covenanted bit, which is different and distinct and separate from the country park in a different colour. So if we had a different colour in between Wootton St Lawrence and the country park, which represents the covenanted land for the Many Down company. Is that a good idea?
In terms of planning document, the covenant is a landowning matter. It's not a planning issue. So from the perspective of the local plan, what you would be allocating is the places where development might happen, where a country park might be, but you wouldn't be identifying on a proposals map a covenanted area. Have I got that wrong? Sorry.
Sorry, in the same way that we're not proposing to develop the country park, but we're using it as information for the public, we can similarly, I believe, have another colour next door to the country park which represents the covenanted part. So it would be doing the same thing as the green aspect, and it would meet what Councillor Leake, I believe, would be wanting, which is in a public document for his particular parish, they accept and acknowledge and appreciate that in addition to the country park, there is covenanted land.
You could do that out with the local plan. This is a proposals map, so it deals with the allocations and relates to planning matters, not to land ownership matters. So it wouldn't be on this document.
Chairman, could I just say that personally I'd be perfectly happy if it just referred to the non-coalescence of the Wootton St Lawrence without having to have a separate.
We're running out of the order is now sort of getting changed because we're getting deep into this. I've got Councillor Harvey next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about little a. This is a...
Councillor Harvey, is this on the same point?
I'll wait till the next point comes up. Then
Thank you very much. Point on Wootton St Lawrence? Otherwise, I've got two public speakers to come yet on this. But we got diverted down when we hit the fork in the road. I've got Councillor Mrs Taylor. Good evening, Councillor Taylor. If you just take a seat. Councillor Gardner.
Sorry, but it's very quick. I think the simple answer to the question is actually to use the wording suggested by Councillor Leake.
Thank you. Is on this point, committee, can we accept that as an insertion, as an amendment into the policy? Thank you very much. Councillor Mr Taylor. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I wish I could talk about the link road, but in 2 minutes I don't have time, but I'd really love to. But I will follow the theme of coherence and deliverability at Manydown. I'm actually quite shocked that I'm here again, another day, another Ofcom, arguing for the Manydown development to be north and not south of the railway lines. I'm shocked because EPP in October last year clearly recommended this, followed closely by a P&I meeting at which similar arguments were made. For some reason, successive site allocations have consistently contained this one field south of the railway lines, just north of Pack Lane. It's not needed, and it would create havoc. I don't know where the influence comes from that insists on including this field, but it's certainly not Ofcom's. So I'll confine my arguments to what I think are unassailable planning reasons, with apologies for those who've heard this on previous Groundhog Days. We have a triangle of land here. If you look at it on your maps, that's bounded on one side by the old Kempshot Lane development, on the north by a double railway line, and on the south by a single carriageway road, which is Pack Lane. One councillor earlier called that road, quite rightly, not more than a country lane. Should houses be built here, we will therefore have a development whose only access, east or west, is via this single carriageway road, Pack Lane. This road is already very inadequate. In fact, it's dangerously inadequate. A young cyclist was killed there a few years ago. If homeowners on the proposed development go east into town, they'll have to negotiate 5 ways, which is already a very poor crossroads. But if they go west to get to Overton, Whitchurch, Andover, etc., they have to queue to go single file through a double railway tunnel and then to plough on through Oakley and through one of its accident black spots. So now, for the portfolio holder, the figure of 3,080 houses can and should be accommodated on the northern part of the site. Why, oh why, throw in this extra field? It's gratuitous and it's wrong. So, very briefly, my plea, please, is a coherent first phase of development at Manydown in this plan, north of the railway lines and east of the ridge line, which there's a clear ridge line on the east, an area defined by us to contain the required housing and no more. Let's not be sloppy about this. Let's keep control of Manydown. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any response from officers at all?
Just in terms of yield, I think that part of the site brings in about 600 units. So if you were to take 600 out of that particular part of the site, you'd have to find somewhere else to put those. And in terms of the new map, I think we've shown there is another area that we're including in the potentially including in the allocation, but it's very limited because of the constraints. That part of the site came out well through the site assessment work, and hence it's included.
Committee, any questions for Councillor Taylor? Thank you very much. I've got another public speaker, Councillor Tilbury. You've got you down for Manydown and Overton, is that right? Okay. And you'll be followed by Councillor Golding.
Thank you. Yes, if we accept that the lower housing figures are no longer credible and have to be increased, it must be the case that the low housing allocation of 3,080 at Manydown is equally flawed. The argument from officers that this is all the site can deliver over the 18-year plan period. Apparently the figure is based on what developers can achieve. If that's the case, then clearly they are looking at the wrong developers. In the 15-year period covering the Basingstoke Town Development Programme from 61 to 76, this council built 11,500 council houses, nearly 4 times the figure we are told is now possible. Are we really expected to believe the construction industry is now taking 4 times as long to build a house? I don't think so. The failure to allocate housing to this site is having a detrimental effect on the rural areas, with Overton, Whitchurch and Bramley taking the bulk of the development. This is totally unacceptable. Oh, having said that, I would support what Councillor Taylor said. Building on the Triangle site in isolation makes no sense. It needs to be built as part of the bigger plan, but you can't build there on its own. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions for Councillor Tilbury? Thank you. Councillor Golding. Correct.
It would be wrong to increase the allocation for Manydown in the way proposed by officers in the map attached to the supplementary report. First, this takes the proposed SPB well over the ridge line. As the planning inspector pointed out at the local plan review, development on the western slopes of the ridge crossing the B3400 would be so prominent and extensive that it would undermine the character and integrity of the narrow belt of countryside between Oakley and Basingstoke. And development on land that slopes towards Wootton St Lawrence, also included here, would adversely affect the character of the adjoining unspoilt countryside. Overall, he concluded that the adverse impact on the countryside weighed substantially against the form and extent of the MDA facilitated by the allocation on Inset Map 2. And Inset Map 2 in 2005 is virtually identical to the area that officers are now proposing. Second, as the planning inspector also said, the allocation of more land than needed would establish the principle of development over the whole area covered. He said, I place little weight on public ownership as a mechanism for delivery, since the owners could sell their interest in the land at any time or pursue other priorities. Plan-led mechanisms should be sufficiently clear and robust to ensure delivery, irrespective of ownership. It is also wrong to allocate any part of Manydown south of the railway line, where the only access to Basingstoke town centre will be along Pack Lane. The transport assessment shows that the junction between Pack Lane, Kempston Lane, Buckskin Lane is already over capacity. The suggested mitigation involves the compulsory purchase of front gardens, which the consultants haven't costed, but admit would be significant. And even then, the delays would be over 16 minutes. The impact on residents of Kempshop, Buckskin and Oakley would be severe. The simple answer is to redraw the SPB north of the railway line so that it stays to the east of the ridge line and remove the allocation south of the railway. On an officer's own figures in the site assessment, that leaves plenty of land for over 3,000 houses within the plan period. I also want to say that it is wrong to include a policy on travellers in this site and also east of Basingstoke and the golf course. As I think Councillor Leake has spotted when I raised this in consultation, officers pointed out that we have evidence that we need sites within the next 5 years, and yet they're proposing putting them in the 3 sites that aren't going to be developed in the first 5 years. I'm having difficulty watching the time. How am I doing?
You're just over.
Right. In that case, I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Golding. Any questions for Councillor Golding? Thank you.
Councillor Golding, in S131 it says that make provision for the phased delivery of approximately, and it says how many units, of which at least 30% will be affordable. I just wondered if you have a comment around the 30% affordable.
I made my comments very clear when we were discussing that. I think it should be 40%, and expect to say so next Monday if it's still at 30% after all that was been said by this committee.
Thank you. Now, I think I've run through my list. Is there any more public speaking on Manydown? Thank you. I will then revert to my list. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. 3 main areas I just want to pick out as points, please, for the officers and cabinet member to take forward. The redrawing of the map in the context of the whole site, I think, is a reasonable thing to do in the context that it should be a whole site master plan. So if the landowners are looking at it in that context, then so should the planning authority, and I think that makes perfectly logical sense. The other comments that have been passed in more detail need to be considered, set alongside all of the other evidence that we've had presented to us. The issue here with the 2 points of the policy I'd like to pick out, firstly, little a, as Councillor James has already said, the 30% figure, I mean, to be honest with you, if the policy goes forward at 30%, it's a big green line in the summary. Absolutely no way would I support 30% on a land that we own. I mean, if we're talking about trying to do best practice, and we're talking about leading an agenda across this whole local plan, I'd just go back to the whole purpose that we bought the land for, going back to 1995, when we also did the stock transfer, and I would remind us of what that council leader at that time told the residents of our borough. 52% to 48% was the vote. It was very close. We will use the money to build more houses for you. Well, nothing like that's been done in the context of this. This opportunity cannot be lost in the context of the affordable housing provision. So 40% must be the minimum, but I've got to be honest, as an aspiration, I would be looking at least 50% of this site, as other councils are up and down the country, on sites they own, in relationships with other developers and other landowners to achieve what is the need of their local area. So as far as it lay goes, if 30% stays in, it's a big green line for me, and I could not in any way support it. I was going to say big red line, but that's too obvious. In the context of little d, the 12.5 hectares of land for a secondary school, just what size of secondary school are we anticipating? And where is the relationship of that to the existing footprint of our schools, the surplus places that currently exists, and in particular I'm thinking about the relationship to Fort Hill. Where in the world does that leave Fort Hill in the future if we are allowing in policy 12.5 hectares without the evidential base? And this is where I would invite, somebody from county to come along and give us the right answers here, because they're the education authority. In the context of 12.5 hectares of space for a secondary school, what size are we talking, and what is the knock-on impact in the context of the rest of the secondary school education in the town? And I think that's something we need to capture and have answered before this goes forward. So those are my 3 points, Chair. And I don't know whether the officers can respond to them now or would like to respond, or just take them and come back to us later.
In terms of the affordable housing percentage, obviously we've had some evidence which was presented to you. As officers, we've talked about this particular issue with the inspector, because I think we felt it was, we got the very strong message from members. His view to us was your policies and your plan must reflect your evidence. So in terms of the evidence to date, what we've got, and we're exploring that further, the 30% is in there. In terms of what the council does, in terms of its, as a landowner, that is something different. And if they were to deal with money down in a different way and convey that to us, then I think we would have to take that into account. In terms of the 12.5 hectares of land for a secondary school, that's come direct from the county in terms of their long-term looking forward as to where they're going to need spaces, how much extra spaces, and also thinking about this is in the context of the whole plan period for the whole of the borough, not just in terms of, not particularly for Basingstoke, not just in terms of the money down site. So hopefully those give you some points. In terms of the number of form entry, do you know what that is on the... But we could find out that form entry point.
I was just looking it up on the government's guidelines. I mean, it depends on how you read their interpretation. We could be talking about a 1,000-place school in the context of what they're talking about across 12.5 acres. It depends on the number of stories on the site. That's their design guidance. So I'm interested in exploring that with the county from the perspective that the first thing in my head is protection of our existing schools in the context of Fort Hill in particular in this, and the primaries, the feeder primaries that go with that as well. Can I just say on the affordable housing bit, I hear what you say, Andrew, I really do, in terms of that policy. You know what I said at the time on that. That was a fundamentally flawed piece of evidence. And if we're going to go ahead now and we're going to say we're going to accept that viability piece of evidence as presented to us, then I really have got a massive problem, and I cannot vote for a local plan that doesn't have on our own land 40% at the very least, let alone the aspiration to deliver 50%. I look at what Oxford's doing on a piece of its own land. It's gone into partnership with a major developer, and they're delivering 400 homes on one site, let alone what we can achieve on many downs. So, for me, I'm sorry, 30% is a big line.
Councillor Ruffell.
Chairman, thank you. I'm glad this topic has come up. I knew it was going to come up at some point, and I said to you earlier that I wanted to address the meeting on it. Mr. Hunter's quite rightly pointed out that the informal advice from the inspector is that we have to base our policies on evidence. And I, of course, sat through the meeting that we all had the other night, where this committee made it abundantly clear that 40% was the minimum, and some councillors made it clear that they wished it to be higher. And you made it clear, as a committee, some of you, that this could be a stumbling block to the approval of the local plan. Now, I've heard that loud and clear. I've heard your criticisms of the analysis that was done and the evidence that was contained. And the decision that I will have to make will be one that will be based upon an analysis of that evidence and whether that evidence is robust enough or not. And also to balance whether I put the wish to get this through full council higher than the wish to get it through the inspector. Because at the end of the day, the inspector is more important than us. If we're getting the plan through, it has to be looked like that, because it is the plan the inspector approves that will be what we get. And I have to listen and balance all of that. Now, what I'm going to invite members to do, not now, but can you email me with constructive criticism of the assessment that we had, so that if I have to move away from the evidence, then I have a basis for doing so, and the officers do too, because ultimately it will come to me at Cabinet and Cabinet as a whole to make a decision whether to depart from the officers' recommendation, but their recommendation is in the papers that you have and have been released now. And at the same time, if you don't, then it makes it a lot harder for me to do so. So that's my plea. I'm just trying to think whether there's anything else I wanted to ask you. There was one other thing. It has occurred to me that we are in an unusually slow period in the housing market. And in all other respects, the plan has to be based upon taking a sensible view on the long term of how the housing market might progress, the demand for housing in Basingstoke and Dean. And yet in this one area, it is pitched on the fact that the deliverability is based upon the low that we're in at the moment, as I see it, not perhaps the high that might come along sometime in the future. And it may be that there's an economic argument for saying, well, actually, this is just too low and restrictive. So could you consider that and email me accordingly as well? And I appeal to members from all sides to help me.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, I mean, I hear what Andrew says and what inspectors say about viability, and it is a critical factor in general. However, in this particular site, if the plan says 40%, it would be up to the inspector to ask the landowners of the site whether the landowners regarded that as excessive and not viable. And I'd be rather surprised if, in this case, the landowners went to the inspector, having approved 40% in full council. At least one of the landowners would say, well, no, we think that's perfectly okay, inspector. Just let us get on with it. There may be some arcane arguments as to whether some other part of the landowner might gibbet that and want a hell of a lot more profit, but then we just have to cause them all to be deselected at their next election round, won't we?
Chairman, can I say one other thing? I've gleaned from what you have just been saying whether you think that Many Down itself should have a different affordability to perhaps the other sites. Could you? I'd like to hear, not now necessarily, but through contact with me outside of this. Otherwise, you'll never get this done. But unless you want to discuss it, but it's up to you to decide what the members' views are on that, because that might be a compromise through the evidence, as it were.
I invite the committee in that case that if you have any arguments one way or the other, if you'd like to pass them directly to the portfolio holder, copy to Andrew Hunter, absolutely. And that way you can record your views in writing to the portfolio holder. Councillor Lord James.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the same point, but I just want to reiterate really that this is a large site. It was in relation to why it was purchased was for the delivery of affordable housing. The evidence of the strategic housing market assessment was that people on the housing register, 7,000 of them couldn't afford the affordable model. We have an opportunity here in relation to, as landowners, to do something and to do something quite special, and I will happily produce some work for Mark in relation to, and Andrew, that we would as a Labour group want to see more than 40% on this site. If you look at Oxford's plan that's just been adopted and talk to the Oxford City Council leader on viability and how you can achieve viability in relation to a larger site, and I think it would be wise for Mark to have a conversation with him on how that can be achieved. If it is not possible to achieve more than 40%, I would like to see Many Down removed from the local plan. and I'd like to see it land banked. I don't want to see many down developed, and I will not be supporting this local plan unless we see more than 40% on that site. It's achievable, and I think it would be absolutely criminal of us to develop this site with 30% affordable housing on that site when people on the register cannot afford to live in anything else, any other model. And if you look at the difference between on 3,080 units, if you look at that against the 30 and 40%, that means that we will lose a whole year's supply, 300 units of affordable housing. And as we saw in relation to the housing strategy that went forward to council last week, it's unlikely that we'll achieve the 300 units. We're only achieving something in the lines of 40 units per year at the moment, so we're not going to achieve what requirements we need to do. But and the other point that I want to pick up on in relation to what's been raised again is little d, and in relation to the evidence here, this is something that's quite new about the school, and I'd like to hear from county. Andrew says he's had some representation from county on what they want to do, but this is the first that we've heard of it in relation to what's been said. We had the comments from the deputy leader in the newspaper about having some special school on Many Down, but I want to understand what this is going to be, this site, and how this is it going to be a free school, and how is it going to impact on the other provisions of schooling around the town. And if there is evidence from county, I'd like to see that, but like I say, if it's not going to be more than 40%, I would like to see SS 3.1 removed from the local plan.
Thank you. Any comment from officers? Nope. Councillor Peach.
The comment is, I'd like to understand where the evidence came for D and how we get to see that, and how we, what was said, and can someone from county come along to talk to us, maybe tomorrow?
The evidence is in the site assessment, which has been presented to members before, and it was also picked up again in the IDP, so it's already been before members at a previous committee.
Thank you. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chair. Just noting the comments around the school, I think I remember there was something in the reports that was mentioned by Andrew Hunter that by 2017 the Winkelbury schools would be oversubscribed, so I'm not ruling out what you're saying, but what I'm saying is there perhaps is some evidence that suggests that it is needed. Scale we can discuss later. In the report as well, it talks, I'm going to have some questions, some comments, I'm just going to get through them all for you. There was comments around facilities, etc. And for me, the one that was missing off there was GPs, or GP surgeries. I believe that was point C, if I remember off the top of my head. And then noted on point J, where regards to the separate identity of villages in the Worthing village, I'm not necessarily advocating a large strategic gap or anything like that, but what I'm thinking is there's also the rural communities that have their own identity, such as Winkelbury, for example, and perhaps that during, I don't know if it can be built into this somewhere, that perhaps just the Roman road is not a sufficient boundary in order to define those communities, or perhaps even a whole new ward. Another comment was around the visual intrusion into the wider landscape, and I may have misread it, but to also consider that from the urban areas looking in, not just from the rural areas looking in. That would change. And as pointed out by our visiting councillors, there was this discussion previously about the ridge line, which seems to have moved over into the new site layout. Get rid of that, that's been answered. That was answered. Yeah, there was also a thought around here. I'm not saying we get rid of allotments, but what I have seen in a lot of new developments, especially some of the sites on Popley, is they build family houses and they have postage stamp sized back gardens for a family of, 4 to 6 people. And I was considering the option of perhaps if we, rather than having extensive allotments, perhaps if people, by our design, had better amenity spaces, i.e. in their own property, maybe they could grow on their own land as opposed to having to go to an allotment. The including of the lower part of the development, I believe there was commentary from Country Watch perhaps in the past that identified that area as a sink. And I note your comments earlier that you were suggesting there may be around 600 units built in there. And they was concerned about the impact that might have. And what I'm looking for is that whether the assessment would be guided more by Basingstoke and Dean to protect the wildlife habitat as opposed to a developer-led guidance as to how they would protect the habitat, and just that assurance there. On points towards the end, it states, I think it was point R, it says ensure adequate infrastructure is provided for surface water and drainage. Under drainage, could you confirm if that includes sewage as well? And finally, the point on the country park is, I believe the policy identifies it as located, whereas in order to make it a flexible site, perhaps that country park can move around when we consider that certain wards like Winkelby and some of the other sites there have been identified as having a lack of access to local green space. Whether that country park is in a flexible site in the best location, whether how that is positioned. So I'm not sure about the policy fixing that in its position. Thank you.
There's a couple of questions in there, Andrew.
Just in terms of the point with the landscape, I think your point about looking in and looking out is picked up under little h, response to the special characteristics and sensitivities of the landscape, and then goes on to say visual intrusion to the wide should also be limited, and the design of outward facing edges should respect and enhance the adjacent countryside. So I think that's they're both looking and out part. Your point about sink, and that again, I think that would be picked up under little I. And the country park location, through master planning, I think that there may well be some linkage. You would need to look at linking that country park into the built-up area. As touched on before, there are certain parts of the site which don't have development potential, so that would have an impact.
Yeah, with the country park, what I'm thinking about is if we have, and I take your point, but if the country site is through potentially a large housing estate, and people are already disadvantaged for green open space, it's about that accessibility to it. And if it just means perhaps shifting it a bit so people can even access a part of it, I think there's got to be an advantage to that.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few points. On this question of 30%, 40%, 40% or more, I would be very uncomfortable if Council and the Cabinet were to approve this policy with less than a statement at least 40% in it. I wouldn't be too happy to go over that at this level, bearing in mind that this is a local plan document and it's not a planning application. the first dwellings, if officers are right about the timetable on this, and I might ask a question if I remember to do so, it's 7 years from now before the first house comes on the market or is available for letting, and we can't possibly forecast what's going to happen in that period of time, but we can pretty well easily forecast we'll need at least 40% affordable homes on a site of this scale. It is up to us as a council subsequently, when we look at the master planning, to determine what we actually want to see on the site in the detail, and I look forward to that. If I'm no longer a councillor, I might come and speak at the committee meeting if I'm not on holiday at the time. But I don't want to go above at least 40% in this document. That doesn't mean to say I reject the idea of having more than 40% at all. So I don't think we should commit the council as landowner to go beyond that, but we should be encouraging ourselves to think seriously about what, when we see master planning documents coming forward, we can critique them, and they'll be our documents, so it'll be up to us what's in them. On the matter of the school, I'd be very upset to agree with something for 3,000 odd dwellings, which didn't make at least some provision for what it says here, which is not build a school, it says safeguarding of land for the provision of a secondary school. And it's up to us through the master planning process to look at the impacts between this and other schools in the area, all schools in the area and all communities. I'll come back to that point in a moment. But I would like to see some security at this level that says if we need a school, we're going to make sure there's land available for it. Doesn't mean we'd have to build one. I'm going to avoid what was muttered in my ear in a moment ago, saying we ought to also secure land for churches, mosques and synagogues, because that would start a whole new line of thinking, which obviously the inspectorate hasn't caught up with yet. I'm a bit concerned about these gypsies, because, as everybody keeps pointing out, it's not going to pass muster in terms of gypsy provision if it's not within the first 5 years. And also because I think dotting these gypsy sites about, as I've said in committee I think before, means they probably won't get built because you won't get a commercial developer coming forward to build them. So I would advocate a much more coherent and positive and planned approach to gypsy sites. Somebody should have been thinking about that for at least 18 months to 2 years, and it's about time somebody came off the pot and said this is where we think it ought to go and this is why, rather than just lumping them into some big sites, which is what appears to have been done rather accidentally. I probably malign those who've given it such thought. On the question of the ridge line that was raised by a visiting speaker, I assume that this site, like all others, is subject, and it does mention it in here, to the landscape and AONB policies that are throughout the plan. We are a subscriber to the AONB policies and management plan, and I would be coming to committee when the planning application comes in, giving them a hard time, as hard a time as I could, on behalf of myself and everybody else I know, if anybody does want to push houses where they're going to be highly visible on a ridge or in front of a ridge and intervisible with the AONB and the rest of the landscape. So I don't think we need to worry about that. It's referenced in here, there are constraints, and it's up to us through the master planning policy to recognise those. Which brings me to a point that I only just picked up really, which is that some of these sub-paragraphs reflect or repeat other policies. Acceptable noise standards and renewable and low carbon energy and surface water and drainage, etc. And it's not clear to me. I mean, does that suggest, and if so, I'm really rather worried that any site we allocate isn't subject to the rest of the plan policies. I think we should make sure that any site we allocate is subject to the rest of the plan policies, in which case, why are we repeating them? And I assume they're in every one. If they're not in every one, why aren't they in some? Which brings me to my other question I was going to ask. Well, that was the question I was going to ask. And then my final point, which really comes up from thinking about this and listening to discussion pro and con developing on Many Down. Many Down abuts on very large numbers of people in existing communities which are immediately next door. I would like to see something at this level that suggests that in the master planning we require the landowner to ensure that the boundaries of this site, as they intersect with other communities, are permeable, so that we're not creating, because I have a place in my ward where we've got across the tracks mentality, this side of the road and that side of the road, and here we've got this you know, this housing estate here and this housing estate here. I would advocate that we make sure that this integrates with Basingstoke in a social way, with the rest of the town in a social way, as well as transport and all those other things, so that the people living in the existing communities can gently see perhaps one of the entrances wherever I live on that road. I can see one of the entrances to the country park, and I walk through and I use the shops in this site on my way, and I come back, go to the public loos, which no doubt can be elegantly provided, and vice versa. I'm in this site, I can see into the greatly improved shopping centre in one of the existing communities, which desperately needs a greatly improved shopping centre and community centre, because its present one's a bit naff. So I'd like to see something in here about permeable boundaries, so that we aren't creating a distinct, we might create, architects love the idea of, and planners, distinct new communities. Well, I don't mind them being distinctive, but I don't want them segregated from the rest of us. I'd like them to be part and parcel of Basingstoke as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Comment?
Excuse me, just 2 points. In terms of the gypsies and travellers, although we need to find provision for the first 5 years, we need to find provision in the long term of the plan as well. So the allocations of small sites that could come forward through in years 5 to 10 and 10 to 15 are important, and we explored that a little bit the other day with the inspector, and he felt that was the best way that we could do that. In terms of the noise points, all of the policies aren't standard, and some of them do have some points that are covered by specific policies, but in certain instances there may be a feature on the site, for instance a railway line or something like that, where we just want to reinforce the point that there may be a noise issue that needs to be mitigated, so that any developer of a future site is clear on those from the start. I think those are things that were often picked up through the SHLA and through the site assessments. We just wanted to make sure that each policy was bespoke to those particular issues.
What's year one of this local plan?
Well, year one would be 2014, but obviously in terms of 2014 is the point at which you'd adopt the plan. But in terms of working towards that, we still have a 748 housing allocation to meet. And in terms of gypsies, we should be looking in the 5 years from now. So that would be year 3, if you like, I suppose.
Just for absolute clarity, in terms of gypsy site allocation, I mean, this is a significant matter for not just me, but quite a lot of other members. Because some of our gypsies sometimes get hoiked out of their perfectly peaceable and lawful, well, illegal, but law-abiding sites. And then, I don't like to see jolly nice people rooted out. Am I right in thinking we do need to make provision for whatever the number was, 7 or whatever number gypsy sites, in the first something years of this plan? And what year would be the final year of, just to be clear, and where are the ones we're allocating for that period?
The gypsy assessment is from 2011, so it started in 2011. We've given permission for one. We've got another application for another. At this point in time, there is no, other than the development control policy, there is no mechanism to allocate a site for them. In terms of this plan, we would either have to do something outside of the plan, because to deal with that issue in the short term, or hope for more planning applications and be positive towards planning applications. In terms of the longer term, there needs to be some ability for the future supply that might come about, which would be identified over a 5-year period, to be dealt with. It's one of the issues that Hart have just had their first couple of days of their examination, and under duty to cooperate and objectively assess need, it was one of the questions that came about the 5 years and the years beyond. So we'd have to have an answer to both parts.
So as a council, we are still short of gypsy sites now, and therefore, and this plan does nothing about it now, and in the next 3 years. Well, that is very bad news, because quite a lot of people think this plan is well, I need to ask another committee to get off its butt and do something about it now, don't I? Not sure what they do if it's not land allocation.
Thank you. Just a quick one from me. Councillor Peter asked you about little r, adequate infrastructure provided for surface water, drainage and sewers. Yep. Yeah, and that's a sort of knock-on on the observation that Councillor Mitchell made about repeating parts of the infrastructure in here that are already covered under other policies within the plan.
I think we're just making sure that where there is an issue on a particular site, it's not missed, and so that for the absolute clarity for the development of those major sites, that those issues are picked up. And there are different things on different sites, so we're trying to make them bespoke for each site.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
Ask whether the committee agrees with my idea that we should make this site permeable in terms of its relationship with its neighbours.
Good point. What's the view of the committee? Well, permeable, I think you explained. Yes, 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 yes.
Yes.
Yes? The answer is yes. Permeable. Distinctive but not.
I was going to say that was the point. Distinctive.
Yeah. Point taken. Yes, Councillor Harvey.
I can understand what Councillor Mitchell is saying and don't have an issue with it. It's the context of that then sits against what the master plan does. So, without wanting to inhibit the master plan, yeah, okay, principle understood.
Councillor Mr. Tucker.
Can I just refer to gypsies? Obviously, we do get individual requests for plots for gypsies, so I'm trying to tell my neighbour. Thank you. So, you know, there is a chance that people can come in within the short time period in between. But the other thing that I wanted to ask was under I, where we refer to Worting, which is a lovely area, conservation area. It says, and the area's listed building, including Worting House. Is there only one house that is listed? I find that strange.
That will be double checked, and if necessary, the wording will be amended. There's 2 more speakers to come. To cue it.
I think I might have to declare an interest because I know the person who owns that house. That it's been mentioned and I'm here, so I have no financial benefit, but I do know the person who owns that building.
Thank you. Councillor Leake.
Thank you. Just on the subject of the one gypsy site that we have allocated, it was in my ward, it was at Monk Sherburn, and I should say that the travellers have now gone, but they put in a planning application for 4 sheds to cover it. Just shows you have to be a bit fluid in these sort of things. But I just wanted to pick up a point made by Councillor Peach, who was, I think, advocating that some part of the country park should be form part of the development area, and I have to say that I would oppose that. The country park should be the country park because it's part of the protection of Wootton St Lawrence, and I would not wish to see the settlement policy boundary being moved from that shown on the plan. Thank you.
Okay, any comment about that? No, no problem, was the response. Councillor Gardner.
I'll keep this brief. Councillor Mitchell underplayed my whispered comment about churches, mosques and synagogues, but I do think that this sort of community facility should be considered under little c, and I would like to see something referred to in the text.
Places of worship.
Inclusion of places of worship, generally at that level. Yes, committee? Thank you. Extension of 1 so far. Councillor Harvey?
If it's an aspiration you can understand it. If we've got evidence from religious communities that they would like to site new facilities, that's a different thing entirely. We haven't got the evidence in front of us that that's the case. So if we're talking about an evidential base, where do we stand on that? Appreciate the principle that you're talking about, but in the context of everything else, it needs to be consistent.
I appreciate that. I would suggest that this is going out to public consultation. I'm going to plant an idea in your minds that if we include it, places of worship, it doesn't commit us to building places of worship. We might actually get a positive reaction or otherwise from public consultation. Councillor Watts first.
On my experience from 40 years ago in master planning of Woodley Airfield and Lower Early, I have to say that mosques and synagogues didn't come into it, but if we had not explicitly earmarked spaces for churches, then they wouldn't have happened. It became a very difficult time when the developer was trying to evade that provision. And so I think what Councillor Gardner says is very important.
Anyone else? Councillor Jones?
Just 2 points. On that point, it was purely that we've been told tonight that everything's in relation to an evidence. We haven't seen any evidence that's related to this today. Then suddenly to go out for consultation, then it's not going to come back. It's not coming back to the council once it's gone out for consultation. That's it. Unless it's something substantial. And we were told by Andrew last week what he meant by that. So it's unlikely to come back. So in a sense, this should have been thought about some time ago if you'd wanted that in. And if you had, then we needed to have collected the evidence to support that. And the other point I'd like to raise, and I didn't raise in relation to this site, is little e, and it talks about include appropriate green space, green infrastructure, and it goes on to then talk about the Borough Council's adopted standard, in line with the Borough Council's adopted standard. Is that the minimum standard or is that the expected standard? And I think it's really important because we're already seeing an erosion of the affordable housing. I would like to know in relation to Little E what that standard is and what we're expecting the landowner to meet. Andrew?
It's in line with the adopted standards, which includes both of those.
Well, as a P&I, we said we wanted the minimum removed last week, so I'm assuming that when it goes forward to Cabinet, it will have just the expected. If not, are you saying that the minimum is still in for next week's?
At this point in time, the adopted standards are those that have expected a minimum within them. And at such a point at which those were changed through a cabinet decision, then this policy would just link to the adopted standard that existed at that particular point in time.
So that's good. So next week when Cabinet listen to what we've said as a P&I, our comments and recommendations, and they make those changes, it then means that Manydown will be delivering an expected standard. Is that right?
My only hesitation is that in terms of the standards are already adopted. So, and they're not adopted by P&I, they're adopted through a different portfolio. So I would just have to double check those points. But if Cabinet had said we're going to change the open space standards to only the expected, then this policy would bite on those.
Because when we looked at, just going back to the discussions we had last week around green infrastructure, very clearly everybody here said that they wanted the minimum taken out of that policy. So it wasn't for green infrastructure, so it wasn't in relation to the green infrastructure strategy, which is owned by Councillor Donnell, it was in relation to the policy aspect of the local plan. And we, as a committee here, said we want there to be only one stand in relation to the standard and expected, and we wanted that removed. And that was a recommendation from this committee to Cabinet. Now, if Cabinet don't listen to us at Cabinet next week and go ahead with the two standards in relation to standard the two, that then means that Manydown can deliver a minimum of open space or unexpected. And in relation to viability, they're already going to get away with delivering less affordable housing on their site because of viability. We could see, and Councillor Peach, you need to be minded of this in relation to that area, that there's going to be a lot less open space.
As the stand at the moment, our policies would be written to respond to the adopted standards. So it'll be, if Cabinet were to make a particular decision, then obviously the policy would relate to that. As officers, we have to put forward to you what we're recommending in the context of the standards that exist at this point in time.
Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. Interesting conundrum, this one. One Cabinet member comes out with a green infrastructure strategy that's got expected a minimum in it, and we're not quite sure whether we're going to get a result on that to get the minimum taken out. Sat here and said he would listen. Sat here he'd take it on board. We've got another Cabinet member with a different set of responsibilities that overlap with the same policy area. So unless these two marry up, unless Councillor Donnell actually comes out with his green infrastructure strategy and gets rid of the minimum and gives us the expected, then we create quite an interesting paradox between what the standard is of the council and what the policy is in planning terms, because that's going to create an interesting thing for developers, isn't it? That your policy says this, but your planning policy says that. We said, and the debate was, and I'm hoping both Cabinet members are listening to this, that the problem with the minimum and the expected is what the developers are likely to do. And that's our fundamental problem here, to protect the level of open space that I think we were all debating for various reasons. We all had our own reasons sat around the table why we wanted it. I just hope that both Cabinet members will deliver a cohesive set of policies to make that happen. Forgive me, Andrew, I'm not hearing, I know you can't necessarily, but I'm not hearing that from you at the moment, and maybe it's a case of you can't go that far yourself in that context. I appreciate that.
Rachel's just reminded me that she seems to recall it, because we haven't got access to all the papers and evidence in front of us tonight. Can the committee recall? Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
No, it wasn't so much as the committee recall. I remember it being a comment. All I'm asking now is it a committee view that is your view, or is it just an individual comment? I recall, I haven't got my notes. I remember it being a comment, but I didn't remember it being an agreed position of the committee.
Councillor Mitchell.
Just to be clear, I think the committee's view was quite clear that we, across the policies, we don't include let-outs. So we don't give the let-out in a policy. We say that it should be this. And if they want to argue less, then they have to come forward and argue less and make the case. The thing that I think, picking up the point about the local plan versus existing council standards, the local plan has to refer to council standards and strategies and isn't a vehicle for changing them. The vehicle for changing them is the committee, cabinet, the council process, and therefore I think I'm sympathetic to officers' view that here we should actually refer to whatever the council has, and if we want to pursue the matter, which I'm sure we all do, of making sure that what we say is what we expect, and we leave it to people to negotiate anything else, we see that through in the appropriate committee and bolt it into the standard, or into the strategy, or into the policy. But, I mean, otherwise we get into a terrible mess where we're constantly discussing the same thing 5 times in 5 different committees. You'd focus on it in the relevant committee.
Sorry, just.
Yes, Councillor Cuba.
When we, Councillor James is absolutely correct, and Councillor Mitchell is absolutely correct, that we agreed unanimously. And the way we did it was we wordsmithed EM5 so that it said the council's adopted expected quantity standard. And that way, it was within the box that we were going for the expected quantity standard, and that's the way we did it.
In terms of longevity of the plan, to be so specific as to use that terminology, I think you're not giving yourself the opportunity to. Well, you may have reviewed your standards within that period of time, and you just want a generic term in here that says your adopted standard. So I think if you want to change the standard, then you do that, as Councillor Mitchell suggested, through that vehicle. But the policies in the plan need to be. So I'm just explaining the position as an officer. I'm not saying that you didn't agree that. I'm just saying that as an officer that would be our recommended approach in taking that forward, and we would recommend that to the portfolio holder. I'm not saying that you didn't say that. I'm just saying that that's the approach that we would suggest as officers.
I make sure, Chairman, that that the expected quantity standard, as defined, remains in subsequent iterations of whatever is amended, so that we make sure that expected quantity standard is the defined capital E, capital Q, capital S that has a meaning.
In this document, members, in this particular policy, do you want to go along with the expression expected? I'm asking now if you want to change that wording as a committee in this particular policy. It would have to be in all the site policies.
So
is that a committee view? Yes. Thank you.
So
Councillor Lee.
Well, what is the officer's recommendation? I'm a little lost as to what we're trying to achieve.
The officer recommendation would be that we just said the adopted standards, and then that would enable us to be clear at whatever point in time we were dealing with a planning application that we were dealing with the adopted standard. If members have an issue with the expected and minimum standards, which I think is what they're saying, then I think that needs to be dealt with through that piece of guidance.
I don't understand why it needs to be replicated in each of the site ones, because it's already covered under the Green Infrastructure Policy. And we've already discussed at great length at various other meetings that whatever happens in one policy is covered by all the other policies already. So if it's defined as expected quantity standard in the EM, whatever number it is, the EM5, then there's no necessity for it to be replicated in each of the allocated sites.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting because we just want to pick this up in terms of where else this needs perhaps to be listened to and then action affected. Councillor Donnell obviously owns the Green Infrastructure Strategy as the Cabinet member. He has said, when he took it the very first occasion to H&E, that he wanted to get a set of standards through. That's where he's gone with it. But that he would get to this stage of the whole process with a set of standards that was agreed by members, that he would listen and bring it forward. Now, it's very clear the direction of travel this committee is taking, and it was very clear the direction of travel H&E was taking, Housing and Environment were taking as well. Now, I appreciate what the officers have said. They've got to give their professional advice. Thank you very much. Our view as members, in the context of what's been said at both committees, is quite clear. Now, the question is, the very simple thing that needs to be done here is that Councillor Donnell needs to listen and change the green infrastructure process, the policy accordingly, because then it will marry, won't it, with the local plan, so that the standards are, and they marry up. That's all the point. So we have the local plan, and we have that inconsistent. Totally agree with what Councillor Mitchell said about the local plan policies. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. All I'm suggesting is, just to square this circle, Councillor Donnell needs to pick it up in his area and just fulfil that side of things to have complete consistency and coherence to what we're trying to achieve.
Right, the Green Infrastructure Strategy is going to Cabinet on the 30th of July. That's from memory. Okay, so we'll make sure that message gets across. You want to delete little e, this is the point. That's the effect of all this discussion. Correct. Absolutely right. Ms. Brangenbergham is just going to run through the points on Manydown.
These, just to make sure I haven't missed, these are the agreed points raised by Cabinet, or by overview. The expansion of little j to reference Whitton St Lawrence, to make the site permeable with its neighbours. You made a comment about distinctive but not cut off from its neighbours. You wanted us to check the number of listed buildings, and if it's more than one, then amend the policy to reflect that. And finally, delete reference to little e. Those are the agreed points. There's lots of comments, but those were the agreed points. Delete.
Delete. I believe A is subject to you submitting information to the portfolio holder.
We still have a view as a committee.
But
Maybe
we don't. It's the problem with the committee is it doesn't have anything based on evidence, and that was the point that the portfolio holder.
It has a schma. It has lots of evidence.
We spent a whole night discussing it, and we collectively, as a committee, agreed to 40%. Even Councillor Golding, the Cabinet portfolio holder, agreed to 40%. And we refuted the proposal that the 30% was an acceptable figure.
Against which evidence? That's the remit I've got. Because the inspector is going to want evidence to support the 40%. That is my understanding. Yes, Councillor Lee?
I mean, if we put in 40%, that is still subject to the viability test, isn't it? So I can't actually see a problem in putting in the 40, I have to say.
Does the committee want to change 30% to 40% within this policy? That's the view, fine. Right, got that. But we're not deleting A, we're changing the number. Fine.
And sorry, Karen, what did you say about E?
You want to delete reference to E. You want to delete E.
Chairman, we've debated all these other policies at great length, and we've commented on them and tried to get them right. And now, for some reason, we're putting them into another policy as if they're going to be ignored. Unless we're actually going to strengthen a policy or make it different for this site, it's not at all clear to me, and I've had no arguments, I've not understood any arguments that said why other policy should be reflected in this site as if for some reason they're not going to be important on other sites. I want to see them adopted on all planning applications, and I want reasons why they're not on any planning application, not just on this one.
Just in terms of specifics on this one, in terms of this is requiring all on-site, so our other policy gives a let out in terms of providing off-site in certain circumstances. It's the networks and the adjoining sites, the particulars that there may be with the country park, etc. It's also, in terms of the site policies, which are somewhat different, you are using these to shape your master planning and your discussions with the developer, and this is putting that all in one place so that you have a clear remit for that developer to work towards and work with. I accept that there may be policies elsewhere in the plan that may complement and may in some circumstances be the same, but we're trying to give a clear picture as to what development will take place and what are the criteria and the important factors that we want developed in a master plan and taken through on those particular sites.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, just quickly, I agree with what Andrews just says there in terms of the site-specific bits. Site-specific bits in elements to allotments as well, because it specifically refers to them, whereas of course it doesn't always have to across everything. In the context as well, the country park shouldn't be the whole of the green space. You want green space in the other bits of the development as well. So it's the context in which it's set specifically, and I agree with Councillor Mitchell, the catch-all is the issue. It shouldn't be the catch-all. It should be site-specific if it's going to be site-specific to the area. So it's a bit of wordsmithing, I think, that picks the two up. Yeah, absolutely. But you're absolutely right about everything else and the kitchen sink in. That should already be in the policy framework anyway, and it should protect the site regardless.
So it stays in.
Before I picked up that you wanted it, that you were going to delete it, I had make reference to complying with the expected policy standard regarding open space green infrastructure. So E stays in with that reference. Is that agreed?
Yes. Yep. Councillor Mr. Tucker.
Sorry, has Karen finished? You didn't mention the sewerage bit. It was being added, I think, wasn't it?
Thank you. Right, we're going to move on to the next policy. I've got no numbers here in these policies. Page 61, Basingstoke Golf Course. I've got some speakers for this. Lovely. Yeah, sure. Yes, please. Basingstoke Golf Course. I've got Julia Vassi. Okay, I've got you down as Basingstoke Golf Course, but you're not speaking about the golf course. Okay, I've got you down for that as well. No problem. Richard Tanner. If you'd like to come forward, please. Following that, I've got Julian Jones. Is he here? Yes, fine. Followed by Steph Napier. See lots of people. I do remember you guys. Richard Tanner, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I've lived and worked in Basingstoke for 30 years. I've watched the changes taking place and had what I hope were constructive letters about town development published in the Gazette during that time. After all, I am a trained geographer and I have an interest in local planning here. My latest letter, published on the 15th of June, was in response to the gridlock feature of the 3rd of June 2013. We know what happens to Winchester Road if there's a minor accident or snow. Gridlock. I suggest that if hundreds and thousands more houses are added to the southwest pedicle, such gridlock will become the norm along the A30 from junction 7 on the M3. To prevent this, we'll require a dual carriageway from Sainsbury's roundabout to Brighton Hill roundabout, which I'm told will cost 20 million or more. Brighton Hill roundabout will need a tunnel, and the Ringway flyover, which is already prepared, will have to be built, which I guess is another 20 million. Already drivers divert off the A30 to use suburban roads like Cross Lane. How much worse will this be for Hatch Warren residents when extra traffic causes regular gridlock? The golf course and Kennel Farm and so on are part of a question of geography. Adding a long thin tail to either side of Winchester Road, over the hill and down to the J7, is urban development, destroys the environment and jams the main access route from the southwest. I oppose it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. Julian Jones. Yep. Welcome. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to address you this evening. Our objection
to the unsustainable development along the A30 to the southwest of the town is because of Parson Brickenhoff's report in the transport thing, indicating that the Kent Shot and Brighton Hill roundabouts are already close to capacity, and the roundabout and highways connecting them would require significant and expensive mitigation in order to accommodate the increased traffic from the development of sites along the A30, and that includes the Basingstoke Golf Club. A modal switch to public transport would have limited impact on congestion without those mitigation measures, since the A30 could not accommodate priority bus lanes, and the topology of the landscape and sites means cycling is impractical. In addition, there are limits on the educational, the schools in the area. And basically, when Stafford talks, you'll hear that the SIL rates and the affordable housing make this development impractical. On the point about gridlock and the M3 and the transport discussions the other day, public weren't allowed to speak. I think it was stated that incidents such as the one in June were outliers and would not be included. I would point out that on the Sunday a week later there was an incident between junctions 6 and 5, and on this Saturday there was an incident between 6 and 7. So these may be outliers, but they're very, very frequent outliers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Napier, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm here to tell you why you should not select the golf course, let alone Hounsome Fields, but not for the usual reasons about traffic gridlock, loss of habitat, coalescence of communities, etc. It would be hard to think of a less sustainable, in NPPF terms, site than the golf course. It will simply be a dormitory estate, so far from Basingstoke's employment and so close to the M3 that residents will travel further to work more frequently by car than from any other proposed site. I've told you that many times before. The site is simply unsustainable. That's a solid planning reason for its deselection. I've also listened assiduously to your discussions about balancing residual land values, affordable housing and SIL rates. Councillor Harvey states that the policy on affordable housing is the most important policy in the plan. Councillor Leake fears that the money for infrastructure will just not appear. All of you want to see a 40% affordable housing rate. It would therefore be perverse to select sites that have intrinsically high infrastructure costs. SIL won't cover it, and the residual land value will be depressed if the developer has to pay. The one thing that will be left to flex will be the affordable housing rate. In other words, if you want affordable housing, don't select the golf course. It requires 21 million of transport mitigation, enormous sewerage investment to pump effluent from the Test Valley into the Loddon Valley. Those are two solid planning and economic reasons why the sites identified in the eastern focus are the correct ones and the golf course should be removed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, speakers, for keeping to time. I believe I don't have any further speakers on the golf course from the public. Councillor Golding. Yep.
Right, it's wrong to include the golf club. The golf club is far too far from the main areas of employment, in particular Basing View. The site isn't viable. The cost of improvements required to the roundabouts between the golf course and the town centre is over 30 million. Also, the golf club is the Basingstoke farthest from the sewage treatment works at Chinham. Thames Water have confirmed that the existing sewers can't cope, can't go through the town centre. The cost of building sewers all the way around would be prohibitive, and there's no evidence to the contrary. The site lacks certainty. Members of the club have voted only to support the promotion of the site. Given the infrastructure costs associated with the site, it is far from clear that members would actually be offered enough to secure a vote in favour of selling. There is, however, an obvious alternative to the site, and that's Lodge Farm. We would need to avoid development in the floodplain. Apart from that, there are few constraints. 62% of BAS 121 and BAS 102 is only moderate quality agricultural land. Most of the land proposed for allocation at Manydown is of higher quality, and the NPPF absolutely explicitly requires us to use areas of poorer quality land in preference to that of higher quality. The site assessment of BAS 121 and BAS 102 has no red, strongly negative classifications, unlike BAS 133 Handsome Fields, which was mentioned earlier, which gets some strongly negatives. Indeed, as time's going, BAS 133, at the local plan review, the inspector said development of this site would represent a substantial and harmful extension of the town into the countryside. The only substantial negative in the site assessment for BAS 121 and Lodge Farm is the assertion that there's only one road access. We now know that's wrong because there's one from BAS 121 and one through Redlands. The transport assessment shows that the cost of mitigation for all the roundabouts on the A33 is less than the cost for just the Kempshire roundabout on the A30. And just very briefly, if I may finally agree with the gentleman from Chinham, as I said, and it's in the papers, I do think the mitigation policies for transport on all these sites are inadequate. We need something like fully mitigate or mitigate as far as possible. Thank you.
Certainly, Councillor James.
Councillor Golding, will you be voting for the plan next week with this site included in it?
I shall be making my mind up on the night when I've heard all the evidence.
Councillor Mrs. Cubitt.
Yes, sorry, you made a reference to a plan reason, citing one of the recent plans for excluding this site. Could you advise which plan you were reading from when you said that it should be excluded and Handsome Fields should be excluded? Which one are you referring to?
My quote from Handsome Fields was from the local plan review 2005. That was what the inspector said about Handsome Fields.
Can I just ask you then, would you like to enlighten, if you're going to then cite the other two sites, what the local plan inspector said about 121 and 102? Because he couldn't have been more explicit that it would be a breach of Park Pale, and he had considerably more reasons for excluding the site to the east than that which you read out.
I think that's selective memory on the part of the councillor, and I don't think you want me to take the time to go and get my papers with the quotes of what he said about Lodge Farm, but he did say that with proper protection for the environment, it would be possible to develop on Lodge Farm.
He said the same of Manydown too.
I'm not disputing Manydown, provided you get the boundary right. Councillor,
I think it's you that has the selective memory, not me.
Councillor Leake.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a little concerned, Councillor Golding, that earlier on, and this is similar to the question asked by Councillor Mr. James, earlier on Councillor Raffel told us that it was his intention to recommend scenario 2. And you are a member of his cabinet, or the cabinet in which he is one of the other portfolio holders. I would have thought it was now time to have cabinet responsibility and not different views between you, because that makes it very difficult for us. We have been trying to hold the line. We've been giving comments, but I suspect that we will have to conclude that that scenario 2 is the correct one. So it's a little worrying that you appear to be opposing that, and I am rather concerned about it.
I don't think there's a question there.
Question is, will you be resigning?
That may depend on what happens next Monday.
Councillor Harvey, do you have a question for Councillor?
I do, Chair. Bearing in mind what's been said, and I've listened very carefully to the other two speakers as well, Rob, what I'd like to understand is at what point did you change your minds? Because in the Gazette last year you were quoted as saying, it is very important that we continue to move forwards to having an approved planning blueprint for how the borough will develop in the future. If we do not, then every community is left open to development on sites chosen by developers, not the council. As land, as Basingstoke Golf Course has been earmarked as a possible site for 1,050 new homes, the vote by the members represents a significant step forward in that process. When did you change your mind? I've got complete respect for what's been said, but I just want to know when you changed your mind from what you said in the Gazette less than a year ago. Or was that Cabinet collective responsibility?
I doubt if that was less than a year ago, but we can debate that afterwards. I have not changed my mind about the importance of getting an agreed plan, but we need an agreed plan that will pass the planning inspector. My mind was changed on the golf course when the judicial review said that we were allowed to consider Manydown, so we had alternatives.
Councillor Mitchell. Thank you, Mrs. Cubitt. Councillor Cubitt, please.
Well,
Councillor
he's
Harvey.
proposing one or two and one or two.
Thank you. So just to be absolutely clear in my mind, Rob, you're right, it was 2011 that you said that in the paper. So then we get the JR, then we get the change of view, and now we're faced with this. So I really am interested, because as a cabinet member, you're sat here saying what you're saying with less than a week to go before this is going to go before the cabinet for approval. If you argue it on the night, are you genuinely telling us, if you don't get this, that you're going to vote against it on Monday night next?
I'm not telling you that, because I've just said I'm going to listen to the evidence. The cabinet has not had a chance to fully discuss this in the light of all the evidence, because we only got the transport assessment evidence last week. And we've been saying as a cabinet for a very long time, and we said in our formal decision back in April that we wanted the further work done before we made the decision. We explicitly said that we were merely approving further work on the list of sites in our April decision, and that we were not agreeing it as the proposed list. And I think that was what Councillor Fells said at the beginning, that that's the working option, but it's not set in stone. And the whole point of this tonight and tomorrow night is to have a debate, give the members of the public a chance to have their say, give councillors a chance to have their say in the light of at least as much of the evidence as we're now going to get before we come to make a cabinet decision.
Can I just register my concern at the way this is going in that context? Because we can have this debate and have all of this. The reality is next Monday Cabinet are going to have to make a decision. It is a Cabinet decision. And then they're going to come to Council in less than a couple of days' time. And we're having this kind of discussion inside the Cabinet? There's a real contradiction of direction of travel and responsibility in this, as far as I can see. And as a member of the Council, I am now very concerned at where this is going.
Chairman, can I share that view?
Certainly you can share.
Can I have my view recorded? I am exceptionally concerned, and I'd like that recorded in the minutes, Karen.
I'd like to remind members of this committee that we're discussing sites and not how the constitution of this or how the cabinet manages its affairs. Councillor Golding?
Just to observe that I was speaking as a ward member tonight, and there is absolutely nothing in our constitution or cabinet government that requires ward members to abandon the interests of their residents.
Thank you. No. Councillor Mitchell?
Thank you, Chairman. I perhaps should have asked Councillor Reid this question. You cited the comments of the inspector in 2005. I remember it well. Are you aware of any changes to national policy and guidance since then?
I have indeed compared what is now in the NPPF with what was there, and you'll be amazed at how many of the comments that the planning inspector made then are still in line with the NPPF, in particular the one about the quality of agricultural land and using the poorer quality land before the better quality.
Councillor Mr. Cubitt, you have a question for Councillor Golding?
So I'd just like to reiterate, do you not think your position is now untenable?
That's not a question.
Well, there's a simple answer, no.
Of course it's a question. I mean,
I didn't hear it as a question up here, that's for sure.
I beg your pardon? It wasn't a rhetorical question, it was a proper question.
Right. Thank you very much. Next one we move on to is east of Basingstoke, unless there's anything else the committee would like. Councillor Leake, is there anything to speak on the golf course from the committee? Councillor Cubitt?
I submitted, and I'm still uneasy about the fact that the horizon is so late, and I requested two officers at submittal that the horizon be changed to 2019-2020 and not 2024 for the phasing. And I didn't understand the officer's response to me, and I'd like just a kind of a more in-depth response to why you don't believe that this site is deliverable by 2019.
Timescales reflect all the issues I think that we've talked about before in terms of ownership,
the provision of alternative facilities from their point of view, and just master planning and all the other constraints associated with the site.
Moving on, if there's nothing else, have you captured anything on that? No. Moving on to east of Basingstoke, as it's called. Now I have speakers for this. Am I there? East of Basingstoke is what we normally refer to as BAS 121, I presume. Yep. Do we have any speakers in the room for this? No, I'm looking at the public. Councillor Tomlin? Councillor Tomlin? Oh, David Thornton, and one more in the back left there. Who's that, please? Councillor David Thornton, please. So again, David, you've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to lump Redlands SL002 in with this, if I may, because you can't have one without the other, as I understand it. So these remarks apply to both of them. It seems a very strange site. Next to the incinerator and the sewage works. It seems, frankly, to us, a frankly bizarre place to put this quantity of housing, unless it is being viewed as a gateway to other sites. And someone has already mentioned Lodge Farm, which may be in the background. But we consider this, for the reasons which I'm sure other people will come, with the pressure on infrastructure and the lack of any mitigation that we've been told about, that's any hard facts on that. But the point that I want to make very strongly on this is that this precludes future development to the A33. Now, in the early 1990s, they were talking about a dual carriageway from Basingstoke. They got as far as the Thornhill traffic lights, and they seem to have stopped. If you build up to the road on both sides, you are precluding the future dualling of the A33, which already needs doing. And then, perhaps then, some other horror will come up to talk to eastern bypasses and things like that. So I would urge councillors to look at the map, look at that narrow 2-lane road between the Thornhill traffic lights and where the Berkshire border, and think, how long can we do without a dual carriageway along that route? So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Steve. You're on time. Appreciate it. By the way, any questions, members, for Councillor Thornton? No. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, I was going to talk on 107, 122, 121, which is, like David Thornton said, linked with Redlands. And then I, as requested by yourself, portfolio holder, have got an idea of where I could substitute the sites. So if I just deal with this site rather than go on and on.
Absolutely, we're doing it site by site. If you've got other sites to talk about, you can come back to
well,
the
the
table.
sort of conclusion I'll do at the end then. Otherwise it sort of messes it. I also just mentioned that Councillor Still is unavailable here tonight and has asked me to say that she does generally follow what I'm saying as well, support what I'm saying. So this particular site, the A33 traffic capacity, we have this problem, it's maximum. The A33 also is a divisive separation of communities. We have that through the centre part of Chinham at the moment, where the Binfields development is a difficult to blend with Chinham itself. I'm actually concerned on this particular site, going back to 1999, you may remember that I was fairly heavily involved in getting this council to actually come out not in favour of the incinerator planning application at that time. This development site falls immediately at the points of maximum grounding of the emissions from the local incinerator's chimney. The environmental study that was submitted at the time by the EA for granting the operator's licence relied on no houses around the site with the maps that it showed. This was to ensure the minimum pollution fell on the existing Chinham residents. Now, the maximum pollution will fall upon any dwellings on this site, and that linked also with Sherwood and Loddon site, but is also linked with the sewage work. The sewage works has unpleasant odours from time to time, as does the incinerator as well. And there are reasons as why, of course, we place these so far away. And I think we ought to take that into account, or I'd ask members to take that into account when thinking about this site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Certainly, Councillor James.
In relation to P in the policy, ensure acceptable noise and odour standards can be met within homes and amenity areas through suitable mitigation measures in light of the nearby incinerator and sewage treatment works. We've heard a lot about mitigation in relation to transport. Do you think in relation to odour standards, what do you think would be a suitable mitigation measure in relation to the sewage works?
Well, thank you. In answer to that, I cannot see how that can be mitigated. Certainly not with the incinerator. Odour, well, if Thames Water want to enclose it and purge things with air at cost of vast sums of money, which I doubt they would want to do. Noise may be triple glazing or something like that, but it isn't a particularly nice thing for forthcoming residents, or perhaps even marketable for a developer.
But in relation to, I just want to be clear, because I don't know the area terribly well, but in relation to the acceptable odour standards, it talks about, it doesn't just talk about in the home, but it also talks about the amenity areas. How can that be mitigated? And is there a great deal of odour from that sewage works at the moment?
There used to be more than there is now, to be fair. We used to have the Chinham whiff, I think was the local phraseology. It depends again on which way the wind blows, but as you go down Wildmoor Lane, Whitmarsh Lane, to the site, the first thing that hits you is they have their domestic septic tank receiving plant, which on a days like today is an acquired taste, perhaps, or smell. And there is this odour associated with the incinerator, which is one of general waste. If go and sniff your wheelie bin, it's that type of thing. Now, you know, I'm not saying they're getting away with it, it's the wrong word. They are isolated, and the wind will disperse such odours currently, and the natural trees and things have a filtering effect off the local community. But I think houses immediately there, I just can't see how you do it without putting them in a glass bubble, which of course is totally impractical.
Councillor Lee.
Is it not up to those who are contemplating buying a house there to make that decision? And are you suggesting that if you're immediately to the west of the A33, you don't have any of these problems, but the minute you step over the 33, you suddenly get a lot of problems?
We have anecdotal evidence that Chinham does suffer from smells from time to time. There was a map, I think I circulated it before, that centre in those little sort of rows that it looks like is the stack of the chimney, and Chinham is just to the side here, so it conveniently missed Chinham. Now, I'm not going to go on how that managed to look good for Chinham, but that's where the housing would go, and that represents the maximum pollution. Now, this council, any person, we should adopt the precautionary principle. That was part of wanting an agreement to not actually support the incinerator itself as a process, as where it was cited, but that is history and it's there. The precautionary principle is that we we have got a site that's green fields. We've got to be pretty sure that by putting houses in there, given we're 10 years on, and if you delve into the medical research, the jury is still out on whether incinerators are in fact causes of pollution. It's so difficult to prove they cause death. It's just very, very difficult. But you'll find everywhere they're opposed, a lot of local authorities now are actually taking them out of their waste strategy. Now, there's obviously a very good reason for that somewhere, but they're also still being built.
You're not actually answering my question. My question was, isn't that up to those who are thinking of buying the property, for them to decide whether or not they like the smell or to take the risk? I mean, it happens elsewhere. It's happening in Tadley, for instance, the Boundary Hall development. People are obviously taking that risk and they're happy to live there. And I think that you will find that this site will fill quite quickly.
Councillor Tomlin, and I have a question for you. Obviously, being local, the amount of, how can I put it, I call them garbage trucks, but the amount of vehicles taking waste into the site for the incinerator, have you got any idea? You know, you were on the original, and you are on the liaison committee for the incinerator. Do you have any idea of the frequency of the vehicle traffic of these rather large vehicles going into there?
Right from memory, I think it was one every 6 minutes. So that doesn't give you a number, but that was how it was explained to us. That's during the day. Obviously, they don't operate at night.
Thank you. Any more questions of Councillor Tomlin? Thank you very much. Any other speakers on East of Basingstoke? No. Members? Councillor Keith Watts.
Yes, Chairman. I'd like to just comment on this, plus Razors Farm and Cuffard Lane in one go. I have consistently, throughout from the very beginnings of the SLAR process, and with detailed work on the consultations and so on, opposed these sites as being suitable for development. And it doesn't cheer me any at all to say that I'm not opposing them on this occasion. I didn't speak when we dealt with Manydown this evening because on the previous occasion, as Diane Taylor referred to Groundhog Day, I spent quite a bit of time trying to get Andrew Hunter to agree we could get some more houses on Manydown, and his view was very, very clear, and we have to accept that advice. And the sheer folly of those people who delayed any work on the master planning of Manydown, it's not just about the judicial review, it's all that led up to that, has left us in a position that if we're going to meet the criteria for a local plan for 15 years now, these are the sites we've got. And I'm not, frankly, unless there are some really serious issues of principle that come up, going to oppose this plan going through because we are very much at risk. And it's not new, I've said this for some time, that it's sheer folly to, for example, go for a ridiculously low target, and the various other things have delayed our progress. So I think it's a great shame that Piatt's Hill and Cufford Lane and Razors Farm are going to be developed. And the price, that is the price for having a council that for years wasn't doing what it should be to prepare for the development of Manydown. And we know who was leading that at the time. So that's where we stand. I mean, it's only very recently come to my notice that there is a site in my own ward which is obviously being prepared to go for appeal because it's not any of the listed sites. But I saw this coming across the whole borough, and we must have a local plan, and then we must stand shoulder to shoulder against anyone who wants to do anything else. I very much regret that the east of Basingstoke is suffering because of the folly of the previous administration, or the current administration in its earlier guise.
Thank Thank you. Councillor Mr. Cubitt.
Well, it's late in the day. I've already said it is in direct breach of the MPPF because by the continued inclusion of BAS 121, we are in breach of the MPPF because we are failing to adhere to the sequential test application. Because were we to do what we are legally obligated to under the MPPF, Hounsome Fields BAS 133 would be allocated and not BAS 121. Secondly, a former cabinet portfolio holder for planning, namely Councillor Golding, said that I was being choosy with my words, but I'm going to read exactly what the plan inspector did say in 2005, simply because he misquoted. The plan inspector said, in reference to Easter Basingstoke, "I am not persuaded that such a development would be preferable to any sites allocated in the plan at Basingstoke to 2011, none of which breach an urban-rural boundary as effective and as clear-cut as Park Pale." And he goes on extensively, but I won't bore you. Thirdly, that same ex-head of planning, Councillor Golding, agreed with members on the 4th of March 2010, when we had a vote in this committee that no development take place in flood zones 2, 3A and 3B. So what I would like to know is why we have a site which is in direct contravention to what was agreed by a former head of planning and a former cabinet member responsible for planning, and why we are in breach of the MPPF when we have alternative category 1 sites that have been identified, namely BAS 133, which, according to the NPPF, is a lower ranking flood risk and therefore should be selected before BAS 121.
Same answer as before. We did the sequential test. We've looked at all the sites. We've looked at them in the context of all issues, not just flooding, but transport, education, etc. The site assessment has been done in a legitimate way in that sense. In terms of the parts of the site that are in those flood zones, they wouldn't be developed for housing. So it comes down to a judgment that that site has better prospects than Hanson Fields in our officer's view. The set of sites that were put in the last core strategy were then put to the Environment Agency on those very points. They came back and said that those were all suitable, and they commended the process that we had taken in terms of site assessment and raised no problems with flood risk in response to BAS 121.
When you went to speak to the Environment Agency, did you say that there was an alternative Category 1 site which would have enabled us to adhere to the sequential test? Which I accept that you say you looked at the evidence in the round, okay? But the sequential test is not about looking at the evidence in the round. There is a specific aspect to the MPPF which requires that, and it reads, development should not be allocated or permitted if there are reasonably available sites appropriate for the proposed development in areas with lower probability of flooding. And that's over and above transport and anything else. That is higher up on the pyramid.
In terms of when we went to the EA, they looked at our sequential test, so they looked at all sites, so all of those were included in there. Yes, all Category 1 sites were in the sequential test, they looked at all of those. And in terms of the policy, as we're clear, avoid development and points of access in the small areas of the site within flood zones 2 and 3, and ensure that the detailed master planning considers scope for expansion of the floodplains. So we're not allocating land for development in the flood zones. We are saying that the master planning would have to deal with that particular point.
I'd just like to publicly record, Ms. Brimacombe, that, and I've said it before, I think your interpretation of the MPPF is interesting, it's totally your prerogative, but I think it couldn't be more specific. It says the strategic flood risk assessment rankings have to be applied, and you have not applied the rankings as I have interpreted the MPPF should be, and therefore I think you are wrong.
Sir. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the comments said by the residents and listening carefully to what's been said. not just in this meeting, because it wasn't the first one that spoke out. This has been a consistent message that we've heard. And then listening to what's been said around the table, I think it's important just to pick out a couple of points for the officers and the cabinet member to think about. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, you listen to what others have said, and the position is we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. Do we do a local plan at 90 mile an hour because we have to, because half our arms up our back? And do we then wind up making, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear at the end of the day. The reality of this whole situation is, are developments south and north in this context actually sustainable? And I think that is a massive question that we are not answering, and it's impossible to answer it at this speed, and it is impossible to give assurance with the evidential base as it currently sits this side of an EIP to that effect, in my opinion. So the danger is, and I appreciate we're going to go through this tonight, that you wind up on Monday and then on Thursday with a situation that hasn't dramatically changed. And what do you do? Because you leave the whole process in the hands of an appeal inspector, and you leave it in the hands of the lawyers arguing at that place. And I think that is a real dereliction of duty, if you like, a dereliction. And it is really hard. I don't underestimate that. The problem with this site, and it's the same with a couple of the others in the context of risk assessment, I mean, I'd like the officers to tell me, have we conducted a risk assessment in relation to the incinerator and to the proximity of residential development? Does that risk assessment sit within our evidential base? If it does, okay, I'd quite like to look at it. If it doesn't, in the context of the issues that Councillor Tomlin was quite rightly raising, I mean, I've come across this issue before in other places where they are very relevant, incredibly relevant in terms of health and safety. So if we've not done that risk assessment, and we cannot satisfy ourselves as a council that in recommending the site for allocation, the risk assessment is guaranteed that there will be no health implications at all, then as a member, you've got to red flag that, because you're saying, yeah, go ahead, develop the site. But we don't have those guarantees in place. It's a difficult one. And yes, people can buy their homes on the market. They can go out there and make a choice. You know, that isn't the case in Tadley, because we actually have a formal framework imposed by legislation that stops that. They have the ONR and the rest of it. So if it's good enough for Tadley, in the same context that they applied locally, consistency here, on a similar kind of issue in terms of safety and risk, I don't derelict the issue between nuclear and incinerator, but nonetheless the risk element is consistent, then why aren't we doing it for Chinham and the surrounding communities? So, I mean, I don't know whether the officers can satisfy the point about the risk assessment.
Just simply to go back to the site assessment, that was conducted and undertaken by your officers in this council, including environmental health. So their particular bent is to look at those particular issues. And we flagged it as an issue in the policy. We've also identified it as a negative in the site assessment, but it's something that, from mitigation, from the perspective of environmental health, is considered can be overcome.
Just so I've got this clear in my head. So there is an issue. We flagged it up. We think we can mitigate it. I'd love to know what the mitigation is. I really would love to know what the mitigation is. I'd love to know what environmental health think the mitigation is. And in that context, if we're signing off on this in any way, shape or form, we're saying that environmental health are guaranteeing or are saying there will be no health issues. And what are the mitigation in that context? Because we know that the evidence is not proven one way or the other yet on the actual health implications of living on top of an incinerator.
In terms of mitigation, it's things like buffers, it's the way you put the glazing that you put into the properties, all of those sorts of issues factor in as mitigation in terms of developing that site. And you will explore those further through your master planning of that particular site to ensure that those things would satisfy the environmental health side of the project, so that you were creating an environment that people would want to live in.
So then it just to finish off, Chair, that then brings us back to the issue with the site then. Because if we're going to say we're going to bring parcels of it forward, because those bits are outside the floodplain, and those parcels might be here or there or wherever, to me that is an inconsistent approach to site allocation anyway, because here's a whole site and we're going to do little bits of it, but in other places we've actually just done the areas that are going to be developed. It's a one process for some and some of others in that respect, in my opinion. And in the context of the health angle, I'm sorry, but hermetically sealing a house so that it doesn't get... I mean, you live, you have communities, you breathe, you enjoy the amenity of the area in a residential place. No buffer is going to protect us from that. I'm just raising it. I don't think the officers can answer it. I do respect, Andrew, where you're coming from on it in terms of what environmental health have said. But for me, that red flag's something that we can't guarantee, and I don't want to build houses next to an incinerator where future health will be put at risk. And we can't guarantee it one way or the other.
I'm going to ask a follow-up to that myself to the officers. If in a lot of these cases, we've got this expression mitigation in just about every site here for an awful lot of subjects. Now, if mitigation upon investigation at master planning, and again, it's a bit of a broad question, if it deems that the mitigation is either not affordable or not sustainable, then we have to revisit the particular site to see what it would yield, bearing in mind that the lack of mitigation that's applied. Am I right in that approach?
Yeah, I think we've consistently said if there was something, an impediment to delivery of a site that came about later on in the process, if you had enough supply for your plan period, then that would be okay. If you didn't, it may mean you have to then revoke, well not revoke, but you need to review your local plan at that particular point to ensure that delivery of another site or higher delivery in another place could take place to counteract that. So it could trigger that review mechanism for your housing strategy in the local plan or in ultimately the whole plan itself.
Thank you. That's what I assumed when I read that business about mitigation, because I've been involved in mitigation measures in a different world, and that's exactly what we had to do. But we did have a kind of a framework. I like the LDF expression, that you review it as you go along. It's a rolling program, and when you come along the bumps in the road like this, but that's my view. Councillor Harvey?
Just quickly, Chair, to finish off, my only issue with any of that is all of this is subject to an appeal inspector's decision on the planning application, and we know the lay of the land where that's concerned.
Just for clarity, it's not an appeal inspector, it would be the local plan inspector so they look at the whole plan in the round rather than a specific appeal.
Councillor Mitchell?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm with Councillor Keith Watts on this, that we really do have to stop listening to siren voices calling for yet more delay while we find yet more evidence of yet more things. And I'm as frustrated as anyone with areas where we feel we don't have as much evidence, and we haven't focused enough time, particularly looking on policies. We've got far too late in the day, in my opinion. But we've had people asking for delay at every stage of the process, including well before the judicial review or any scent of a judicial review. We had all sorts of requests for delay at every stage of the process. And effectively, if we delay it further now, we are simply saying, let someone else decide where to build. We're abdicating our own responsibility. And people who now come to us saying, no, you shouldn't build here, you must build there, etc., I'm afraid it's too late in the day. We've heard all the arguments. I'm sure we've heard them several times. And I'm deeply sympathetic to those who will be affected by the implications of what we're now deciding. But it is too late to yet again start the process of looking at sites and analysing. What we should be doing, in my opinion, at this stage is we should be raising questions about the policies and recommending changes in the policies, which we have done with some success so far. But also I think what we should be doing is recommending actions in the plan process and outside the plan process to be taken by the council and others to make sure that whatever comes out of this, the people who do live in these houses, and I agree with John, people will come and buy these houses, as I understand the Tadley site is sold out. And despite the fact that it's in the lee of a nuclear weapons establishment, people will come and buy these houses. We should be, as a council, doing everything we can to look after their interests, much of which isn't in the local plan process. And on that basis, I have a couple of questions about this particular policy. Firstly, who discusses with whom what can or might be done at what cost at and around the incinerator, as opposed to at and in and around the site? Because I have to say, double glazing they're going to get anyway. The smell in your garden or your inability to open your windows because the wind's in the wrong direction is not a clever idea. And you have to address this at source if you possibly can. So somewhere somebody should be having this debate with the incinerator technology and so forth. And of course, like, coal-fired power stations, all sorts of things can be done to amend what happens with emissions. So that's first question. I've got a couple of others.
Just in terms of that, once you were doing the master planning side of it, as that's a particular issue, you would be dealing with that matter with consultants who would be looking at the pollution aspects on that site, and as part of that you would expect them to engage with both us as a planning authority and with the people who would operate the incinerator, and along with any colleagues that we might bring into that process, including environmental health.
Well, maybe we can send a message to the relevant cabinet member and officers from this committee that says, don't wait for all that, please. Let's start that discussion now. Let's get some experts on the case and let's get on with it rather than waiting on a master planning activity. Let's be doing that in background so that we've got a clear position on what we want out of various sites around that area if they come forward, if we need money to mitigate something actually on the incinerator rather than just have it, it's all going to be done by this site. Let's get on with the process. My second question is, how do officers come to the conclusion that in some of these policies we ask that the development includes local shopping facilities?
No rule of thumb. It just generally is. It's in the larger sites. So the sites where there's more, where you're going to be accommodating more than 2,000 residents, and you would want them to have some sort of facility within a walking distance, if that was possible.
Well,
excuse me, Councillor Mitchell. Committee standing orders. Don't worry, we're not going to be going along for very much longer. I'm going to put a limit on this at 10 o'clock. Is that accepted? Thank you.
Reason I ask is that I live in a quite large community, comparable perhaps to one of these sites, where we have one village shop, post office, which is very vulnerable indeed on the market at the moment, and we're desperately hoping somebody will come along and buy it and keep it running. And I'm just concerned that we should be looking at this with a little bit more sensitivity. And I don't want to suggest we drop this now, but somewhere in here, I really would suggest that we have a clause somewhere that says we look at the overall shopping requirements of the residents of a new development, because in some cases it might be better to enhance what's already available round the corner. I mean, this particular site is quite near a Tesco store, but it's not a particularly brilliant Tesco store, he says, as a user of Tesco stores, on a shopping centre that's not, in my view, a particularly brilliant shopping centre. And therefore there's an argument that says you look at the facilities around the place and say, what can we do to make normal everyday services really effective for these people? And also, if we're going to install a requirement for shopping, please can we, somewhere behind this process, arrange that the facilities made available for shops are multi-purpose and could be readily converted into dwellings or some other economic purpose if it turns out nobody wants to come and open a shop there, or if it turns out that somebody comes and opens a shop there because we made them a wonderful opportunity and the shop just doesn't trade properly. And I've got a shop in my ward which shouldn't be there. It doesn't trade properly, it's just a blight on the landscape, and everyone wants to get rid of it. So, the assumption that shopping facilities are a natural thing to have if you're building 900 dwellings is not necessarily sound.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment on that one that Taylor's Farm is a classic example once again. Sorry, I'm being a bit cynical. Now, for the public, we're planning to stop this committee session tonight. Are you the public, Councillor Mr. Q? You're down to speak next. We will probably be finishing, we'll probably come up to Razor's Farm. We won't include Razor's Farm tonight. Are there any of the public that can't come along tomorrow night that would want to speak tonight instead? I'll give you that opportunity. got Councillor Thornton and Councillor Beerman. As soon as we finish this off, I'm going to give you the opportunity before 10 o'clock to speak, if that's all right. Fine. Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, it's just that one of my fellow councillors just said that it's too late in the day now to be discussing the merits or otherwise of the site, but that's exactly what the purpose of this evening was to discuss the merits or otherwise of the sites.
Well, actually, the policy of the site is what we're discussing tonight.
This is the first time. This is the first time in this current incarnation of our core strategy that we're discussing suitable strategic sites. So it is the policy, but it is also the sites. And that is why you had at the beginning of this meeting the portfolio holder stating that the officers are recommending scenario 2, and why you have Councillor Leek in a state of shock, as are some of us, that a very senior cabinet member is advocating a different scenario. So it is about the policies of the sites, but it is also the merits of the sites as well. And I just want to say, as I've already said, that first of all it's in breach of the MPPF, but also in terms of the smell, in 1960s, Richard Steele, the Director of Town Development, and Leslie Austin Crowe, the Chief Development Group Surveyor, said on public record that it would be wrong to site an incinerator and a sewage works close to human habitation. So that's what was stated in 1960, and that's why the incinerator and the sewage treatment work was... Sorry? That's why the sewage works and the incinerator were sited where they were, away from human habitation. So it's very odd now that in 2013 we consider something to be acceptable now, which was not considered acceptable in 1960, when we consider ourselves to have higher environmental standards now than we do in 1960. Secondly, there was a very, very, very strong smell of sewage just the other day, and I reported it to the environment officer. And he went and he confirmed that the smell was way off the scale, and he talked to the area manager, who'd had to suspend the operations, and what they were doing was they were completing an emptying of one of the sludge drying beds, which they have to do from time to time, and the stench was so bad that it gave my daughter and I a splitting headache instantly on the A33. Now, that was me coming down the A33 at Taylor's Farm roundabout from a routine operation of cleaning out the sludge beds. So what are we going to do to the poor residents who are going to be living in these new houses that are going to be sited by the incinerator and the sewage works, which were not considered acceptable in 1960? What are we going to do with them and their children when they have to next clean out the sludge pit beds?
I'm not sure that was a question to the officers. I'd like to pick up that point and also the point that Councillor Mitchell made earlier on. And I would ask the committee, Councillor Mitchell suggested that there should be an early approach of the suggested group that Mr. Hunter alluded to before, to do an early investigation. I see that this site is not due to come on stream until 2019, but to confirm the validity of the site in terms of the incinerator and the sewage farm, to start not an investigation now, but in slower time, but start it now and not wait for the master planning of the site, to investigate whether the existing sewage farm and incinerator are producing any kind of inhibitors against building houses, and if there would be kinds of mitigation. And also, of course, with the increased development that's inevitably going to come along in Basingstoke, we've got to look at the sewage farm and whether it's adequate or not. Would the committee go along with that kind of approach? Councillor Harvey. Sorry, Councillor Mrs. James, I beg your pardon.
Just to say that I've seen a development brief in relation to this site that's already been worked up. So, and it goes back 3 years, I think.
That was in the original infrastructure development plan?
No. Development brief in relation to this site. They've already mastered, so and so I think it's, yeah. So, and it's very clear as to what they're going to do. So, very expensive document.
It's the content of the document is the main thing. which I'm not privy to. I haven't seen this. Mr. Hunter?
This was a landowner document which was prepared ahead of the last core strategy. So they did some work on about 3 different options on that site. And I think we've shared it with members. Yeah.
Councillor Mitchell?
Just be clear, what I was asking the committee to support is not to do with the local plan process or this particular site. It's to do with the council. Message from this committee to whatever committee it might be, and the portfolio environment committee, I assume, and the portfolio holder, to start now looking at the role of the incinerator in the future, given the increase in capacity it's going to have to take. I just point out en passant that the world has changed just slightly since 1960. I can't remember the exact date, but at that time there was either 1 or 0 computers in the UK, and it went wrong every 23 minutes. And technology has changed dramatically in that period of time, including technology for dealing with noise and including technology for dealing with odours. And if any member is not aware of the amazing technology that's now available for dealing with odours, I'll be very happy to provide them with some information.
What I'm trying to do is get a feel for the committee. Do they want anything to happen? Or do we leave it to the master planning process and the existing documentation? Councillor?
I mean, no matter what happens, you can't leave it just to the master planning process, because I don't trust the master planning process in the hands of the landowner to deliver what people are looking for. The issue that we haven't got over, I don't think we can get over, and it needs to be said, is the principle of the matter in the first place. So if you can't get past that, then that raises questions, regardless of whether you want to say you don't want to do this or don't want to do it because of all the risks and planning by appeal and the rest of it. The reality is, if you shouldn't allocate a site, you shouldn't allocate a site. And there are questions that have been raised with good reason on this particular issue that necessarily cannot be easily satisfied tonight. So yeah, if you do take it forward, okay, on the head be it. But the consequences of needing the work to be done properly and thoroughly and safely, so that that it provides a safe development, is huge. That's a huge undertaking from somebody. So unless we can get a guarantee on that in the policy or a guarantee in that from officers, and I'm not sure any officer would want to guarantee that, would they? The principle of the issues at stake here.
Yeah, on this general point, Chairman, we're talking about something that goes from now till 25 years' time. It's not beyond the possibility that somebody doing an assessment of the incinerator in the light of this plan in the long term might rapidly conclude that incinerator isn't sufficient for the future and we need a different one on a different site, or we need to deal with it in a different way. Now, you can't take all those things into account when making your local plan, because you've got to do a long-term strategic assessment of another matter, which is to do with the disposal of waste in the borough. All I'm suggesting is we ask the relevant committee and portfolio holder to get on with that now. Now, people can continue to argue whether this site should go forward. That seems to me a quite separate matter from this site. It's in the interest of anybody who lives in that area, and it's in the interest of the borough and its residents. I can't see why anybody would oppose us making that recommendation.
Is that the recommendation of the committee? Yes? On my left, would you go along with that? No comment. I take no comment as not objecting.
I want to know where the residents will be evacuated when they have to empty the sludge dryer.
No, that's not the question, Councillor Cubitt. Councillor Gardner, I've got you down. On this topic?
They had a problem in Reading called the Whitley Whiff. They solved that. They had a problem in Slough with the sewage farm adjacent to the M4. They solved that. It's not beyond the wit of man to actually find a solution to this problem. They just need the will. So I think we need to push for a solution now. So that's that one. In terms
Can I address that, please? Because I'd just like Councillor Leake, if he's got something to put towards that.
I'd
sorry, I take a different view. I think this is all part of the master planning of the site, as the officers have said. And I should just add that most of the sewage sludge is actually delivered to the fields around my house. And we don't really have a problem. It's a short-term thing. It does good to the fields, and most farmers like it.
I really would like to get some feel from what the committee would like to happen over this. If it's
I withdraw my recommendation.
there is no agreed pathway to investigate the incinerator from the committee. I have to make that bold statement. Now, yeah, I understand that. I understand. Thank you.
The sewage that's applied to the field is very specific graded sewage, and Councillor Leek will know it because he owns all the land, and it's not a relevant comparison because the farmers are allowed to put grade 2 and grade 3, but the stench from a slurry pit's a bit different.
We have no comments on this policy. No agreed comments at all. Okay, I'm going to stop there. There's no agreed comments of this committee to go forward against this policy for this site. That's what we have to do at the end of each of these policies. We have agreed comments that will be forwarded to the portfolio holder. At the moment, we do have none on this site.
Is my public record that it's in breach of the MPPF going to be?
That's fine, absolutely, but it's not an agreed policy of this committee. Now, I'm going to invite Councillor Beerman to come to the table, and followed by Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, Chair. I can't help just comment on that last comment about the smells. I don't think many estate agents will be making would-be purchasers aware of likely smells drifting over. And whilst I would normally agree with Councillor Leek about buyer beware, I think that one is one you can't expect. AWE, you can see and you could expect certain potentials from there. Anyway, that's not the main point. I wish to address Razors Farm and Cufford Farm in one collection, indeed all the others together, and that is they are all in many ways interdependent because they're going to use a certain common infrastructure. It is my contention there, I'm afraid Mr. Hunter disagrees with this, but that they should be looked together as one master plan, not separate master plan, because what happens in one location, and particularly so with Cufford and Razors, one is going to be dependent on the other. Interestingly, we haven't had a debate about the value of Cufford Farm as such, because last time local ward members were busily telling everybody, well, it's only a reserve site, so really you don't need to take that terribly serious. So in terms of the public domain, that's not had any discussion whatsoever. My concern about, in terms of looking at it comprehensively, all the sites around Chinham comprehensively, is largely, apart from services like schools and shops, rightly mentioned, very rightly mentioned, is the transport issue. And if I can just quickly remind colleagues that we still haven't seen a proper transport plan. Stuff coming off from Razors Farm is going to have one of the mega impacts on Binfields Farm, Binfields Roundabout, which I shall in future I think call Bizarre Roundabout, on the basis of the mitigation put forward for that roundabout with its 4 lanes and other nonsense. And I am concerned that if we do not look at the whole area as a master plan, then we are going to be asking for lots of transport problems. And as other colleagues have said, we've not dealt with the A33. The pressure on the A33 is at the moment pretty unsustainable. And with just one of these developments going forward, what is already terribly antisocial at the moment in terms of access will be multiplying multifold, and I think it'll go up in the same way as noise goes up. In other words, exponentially, not as a straight graph. And with that, I am sadly lost my time, or used up my time. I just say, in parting, I think the thing should be delayed. I know colleagues don't believe that, but I think we've got most of the plans that will be come forward by developers, the big ones, are already in the pot anyway, whether or not we're putting them in our plan. Razors Farm, Kiln Farm, Kennel Farm, just think about it, they're already there.
Councillor Birman, I don't know if anybody wants to ask you a question. Councillor Lee.
Did you hear the speakers on the golf course and Kennel Farm talking about the traffic impacts on the A30? And do you think that the A33 is significantly worse than the A30? Or should we all accept that we've got some transport problems and those are not going to be resolved this evening or by this local plan? We have to work through those, having chosen our sites.
Frankly, my problem with the golf course, which I have suggested in my earlier address, should be removed, is not mainly the transport, because once you're at the golf course, you can escape onto the M3 and go one way or the other and round Basingstoke if you so wish. So I don't think the transport at the golf course is the same problem. The A33, the burden on the A33 is from Chinham right up to Reading. And on a very dangerous road, whereas the stretch from the golf course to major road network is not as stressed. So no, I don't think it's comparable, but I'm not suggesting that the golf course go forward. I'm suggesting that be taken out. I'm suggesting, and I'm sorry I have to again disagree with expert Hunter, I respect his commitment, but I have good evidence, and I'm happy to put the argument given the time another time. It could all be done, or most of it, on Many Down. It's perfectly possible if one spreads it around the site and has a proper master plan up front, complete with relief road, bypass, call it what you wish.
The supplementary. So you'd like all the traffic to be on the A339 and not on the A30 or the A33. Is that the solution to it?
No, the traffic on the A339 would not be as big a burden, because I don't believe there's going to be everybody wanting to rush up to Newbury suddenly. I don't think that's going to be seriously intensified. But you can certainly get to the M3 and come to the north of Basingstoke if one so wishes, using the M3 as a bypass. Well, you don't bother with cycle paths anyway.
Certainly, Mr. Hunt.
I'm just going to pick up on a couple of points Councillor Bierman's made. In terms of the overall plan, the transport assessment looks at the sites cumulatively, so we're looking at everything in around, and that's been we've tried to present it in that way. In terms of the infrastructure delivery plan, that does the same. So it's giving you the infrastructure in the round that's required across the piece. So it's your master planning point in terms of the infrastructure. In terms of the two policies for Cufford Farm and Razors Farm, we do make the point at the bottom of Razors Farm to ensure, point P, ensure that it provides for integration of future development on the Cufford Farm allocation. If members wanted to make comments on those particular points in terms of how the integration or master planning might work in terms of sites which are physically related, then I'm interested to hear that.
Thank you. We will do that when we come on to those particular policies. Councillor Mr. James.
My question to Martin was similar to that, really. It was in relation to that you talked about the two sites being linked. And in relation to the policy on Cufford Farm, it says that the 32-hectare site lies immediately to the north of Razors Farm allocation and will only be released for development after or in conjunction with the development of the Razors Farm site. I'd just quite like to understand your concerns and why we should, in relation to what Andrew has just said, consider the two together. And as I don't know the area terribly well, could you just talk me through that?
I'll try. I mean, do bear in mind, colleagues, I don't have the benefit, I don't know who has, of seeing this transport master plan or assessment in its completed work. So how the various mitigations that are intended are going to work is something that I don't have the benefit of, and that's not because I'm not interested, it's just that I don't have access to the thing. Taking the specifics of the two potential development sites, as far as one knows, the intention would be to take some of the traffic from Cufford Farm through Razors Farm. In other words, the present plan that's coming forward for planning has a link possibility through to the north from Razors Farm into Cufford. Whether Cufford Farm would also have access onto Cufford Lane, which I suspect it would do, I don't know, because, as I say, that isn't the detail that's been shared with us yet. Either way, all the traffic from Razors Farm and Cufford Farm would, that's heading into the centre of Basingstoke, is targeted to go down through the Chinham Business Park and the Hampshire International Business Park and hit the Red Army roundabout, where there is already a major congestion problem, and the commercial premises on the Chinham Business Park and Hampshire International Business Park are very concerned just with the Razors Farm development, let alone Cufford Farm being added to it. Some of the traffic would also go through Chinham, the traffic bound east, well, we already know about the Binfields roundabout, to which I've referred, and that traffic, a lot of that traffic would potentially go past the four-lane school site, where there is already an issue with the industrial vehicles and traffic coming off the business park because they can't get off at the Red Army roundabout, so they nip through Chinham and go past the school, where there's a serious danger when the schools are coming in the morning. When they're leaving, it's not such a problem because it's not during the rush hour, of course. I don't know whether that explains it properly or not.
Any more questions for Councillor Beerman? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues.
And you said, being a local, yes. Councillor David Thornton. Councillor Mr. Tucker, you want a question across? Just answer.
Originally, when Taylor's Farm was developed, there was supposed to be, what's it called? A link road on the top, which would have taken into account all of this. Is this still not going to be done, or is it?
When we presented the transport assessment, one of the options included the Gauger Avenue link road within it. In fact, two of the options, was it two? Two of the options, which is a link from Cufford Farm through to the A33. So you've got that opportunity, and my understanding is that County have been exploring that further recently in terms of...
Councillor Mrs. Cubitt, if you would like a discussion with anybody else, would you please take it outside the committee room? Thank you.
Hopefully that helps.
Yes, Councillor Beerman.
In terms of that last point, there's a very specific thing in as much as Crowdace, who put in the application for Razors Farm, have made it emphatically clear that they don't think, in terms of the traffic that Razors Farm would generate, they can justify being required to put in that link road to which there's just been reference. So they would not want to do it, and if they're not going to do it, I don't know where the county is going to find the money, because they're spending it all on Black Dam. And no Chinham railway station.
Any comment? No. Okay. Fine. Okay. Councillor Thornton. 2 minutes.
Well, I've little to add to what Martin has just said. But I would like to point out that if you put the that number of housing very close to a business park which includes a business which stores large quantities of compressed gases, which is not really a good thing to have within 200-300 metres of domestic houses. And also there are, at the north of the site, there are unoccupied sites. And if you put housing close to the edge of the business parks, then this is going to limit the businesses who will be able to move into those sites. There will be lots of things which will no longer be allowed there, simply because of the houses. So I think it's limiting the business park in a way which is unfortunate, to say the least of it. I absolutely agree with everything that Martin said about the transport. And the other thing which I think really does needs to be pointed out is that the railway station will be much, if we ever get a Chiltern railway station, will be much better sited on the western side of the railway line, up in the corner of the business park, than up against the residential property in Chiltern. So that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Thornton? Thank you, Councillor. Now, we're coming up towards 5 to 10. We put standing orders to 10 o'clock. I would suggest, and if the committee will go along with it, we'll adjourn the meeting now till tomorrow evening. Agreed? Thank you very much.